Chapter 1062. Luo Fan already knew that Qian Tong had returned, so without waiting for Han Er to inform him, he went directly to Qian Tong's study and greeted him. As Qian Tong's son, Luo Fan did not have any objection to calling him father, just because his life essence was countless times higher than Qian Tong's. For existences at his level, addressing others was a trivial matter. Of course, calling others father wasn't a big deal to him. Not to mention that he was only a sole avatar here, and this avatar was Qian Tong's son. Therefore, he didn't feel the slightest bit awkward addressing Qian Tong as father. "Where have you been these past 3 days? How come there was no news at all?" Qian Tong asked Luo Fan after a series of greetings. Luo Fan smiled faintly and replied, "I met Master 3 days ago. Master said my aptitude was good, so he accepted me as his disciple. These 3 days, Master took me to a mysterious cave mansion to cultivate in seclusion. Not long ago, Master gave me a small golden ball and told me to come back to deal with some worldly affairs, after which I would travel the world with him." "What?" Qian Tong was shocked when he heard Luo Fan's words, his originally sitting figure abruptly standing up from the stool. "You worshipped a master, and your master gave you a small golden ball?" Qian Tong did not know why, but he suddenly associated this golden ball with what happened at the river crossing. Could it be that the golden ball was collected there? My son's master is the powerhouse who collected most of the golden balls. Or could it be that he was the one who mended the river crossing in the past 3 days? For a time, all kinds of thoughts flooded Qian Tong's mind, causing him to freeze in place. After a while, Qian Tong hurriedly said, "Where's the golden ball? Quickly bring it to father to see." This was Luo Fan's original plan, but at this time he smiled faintly, took out the golden ball from his chest pocket, and handed it to Qian Tong. Qian Tong took the golden ball and felt that it was quite heavy, but it was only equivalent to the size of the ball. It didn't seem like it was made of gold that was 10,000 feet in diameter. When he felt the weight, Qian Tong suddenly lost a lot of confidence in his guess. He stared at the small ball. After all, he was a level 6 mortal realm cultivator. Although they were many times weaker than cultivators at the 9th level of the mortal realm, or even the immortal realm, they were still much weaker. Even so, he was still a cultivator with many abilities. As he stared intently, the small ball began to grow larger and larger in his eyes. As the golden sphere grew larger and larger, Qian Tong's expression constantly changed. But he gradually discovered the golden sphere was becoming more and more familiar. The entire ball was not a flat one, a real sphere. Instead, it was a very strange golden sphere that seemed to be formed from countless tiny particles. As for the particles that made up the sphere, each and every one of them, to Qian Tong's surprise, he felt that this person was very familiar. Those were obviously the countless grains of gold that had appeared at the opening of the river. It really is that gold. Qian Tong's expression instantly changed, his eyes filled with shock. If this golden sphere was that golden sphere, then it meant that his son's master was the powerful being who had displayed astonishing power and easily gathered a huge amount of gold and condensed it into a small sphere. If he were to make a bold guess, then if the changes in the river opening over the past 3 days were caused by a cultivator, then that cultivator was most likely his son's master. Understanding this, Qian Tong's first feeling was shock and fear. Then he quickly reacted, an unimaginable excitement and thrill surging in his heart. It had to be known that although this cultivator was so powerful, terrifying to the point that anyone would feel fear, he was his son's master. However, he was his son's master. His son had such a powerful master. How lucky was that for him and his money? How lucky was that for him? All sorts of thoughts flashed through Qian Tong's mind. After a while, he finally said, "Your master is a supreme expert. I wonder if my son can speak to your master so that I can personally pay a visit to thank him. I have already invited master to come to our family, but master said that he has no fate with the Qian family. If it weren't for my aptitude being suitable for his cultivation method, he wouldn't have accepted me as a disciple and wouldn't have been willing to come." Luo Fan had already expected this and directly gave the answer he had prepared beforehand. When Qiantong heard this, he sighed. Although he was disappointed, it wasn't too unexpected. After all, such a supreme expert's every move had a profound meaning. If he wanted to see him, he would have seen him long ago. Since he hadn't appeared at this time, the possibility of him meeting him was naturally quite small. After sighing, he said to Luo Fan, "Then forget it. Thank your master for me. Since your master wants you to travel the world with him, then you should go." "When did your master say we would leave?" "Master said we would leave in 3 days." Luo Fan said, "Oh, 3 days. You should spend these 3 days with your mother." Qiantong sighed and patted Luo Fan's shoulder. Yes, Luo Fan certainly wouldn't refute. "Since this golden ball was given to you by your master, you should keep it. This golden ball is extremely precious. You must not neglect it," Qiantong sighed. Why does her father say this? "This golden ball was originally given to me by master to deal with worldly affairs. Since it is to deal with worldly affairs, it should naturally be handed over to Sir Father. How could I keep it with me?" Luo Fan quickly shook his head. Wasn't this nonsense? What did he need so much gold for? This was incomparably precious in the eyes of others, but to him, it was nothing more than waste and dregs. With just a thought, he could produce an endless amount of gold. Qiantong thought about it and agreed. If his son followed such a powerful expert, why would he still need this gold? Leaving it with him would be a complete waste, and there was no need for it at all. It was better to leave it with the Qian family and let the Qian family develop and grow stronger. In that case, father will keep this gold. Qiantong placed the golden ball directly on the table before turning to look at Luo Fan. After a while, Qiantong sighed and said, "You have always been calm and focused on the Tao since you were a child. This time, you were able to meet a powerful expert like your master, which is a great blessing. In the future, you must cherish this blessing and treat your master with enough respect. You must be careful when dealing with things. You must not act as casually as you would at home." Qiantong talked about many things that caught Luo Fan's attention. His appearance was similar to that of an ordinary parent in the mortal world explaining to their child who was going on a long journey for the first time. Although the expression on his face didn't show much. Just these words alone. It was easy to see just how reluctant he was to part with his son. Luo Fan was also aware of this, but he remained timid to the side, agreeing to everything Qiantong said. This series of instructions lasted for more than an hour before it ended. After it was over, Qiantong seemed to have aged a lot. With a wave of his hand, Qiantong dismissed Luo Fan. Luo Fan looked at Qiantong's appearance and sighed his heart. Bowing deeply to the other party, Yang Kai turned and left the study. The child has grown up. He will eventually leave his parents' side. Qiantong looked at Luo Fan's departing figure, a trace of helplessness flashing in his eyes as he muttered to himself. Luo Fan's mother in this life was also a cultivator, but she was only a 4th grade mortal realm cultivator. Not to mention Luo Fan, she was countless times worse than Qiantong. Such a person was naturally extremely weak as a cultivator, but as a wife, she was strong enough. When Luo Fan saw his mother in this life, he recounted the words he had just said to Qiantong. His mother couldn't stop crying, and although she said happy words, her eyes were filled with sadness and reluctance. Although Luo Fan couldn't bear it, he knew that this was something he had to experience. Even if he didn't experience it now, he would definitely have to experience it again in a few years. At that time, things would become more troublesome and they might suffer even more. It was better to find an excuse to leave home now and go to this continent to experience all kinds of things so that he could open the gate of ascension as soon as possible and find the truth behind this Tao field. Therefore, he hardened his heart and comforted his parents in this life, but he still didn't change his mind. The next day, Luo Fan was chatting with his parents in this life in the back garden when he suddenly felt the ground shake, as if something astonishingly heavy had fallen in the Qian family residence. At this moment, Luo Fan faintly felt his mind relax a little, and the gate of ascension that he could only faintly see became much clearer. After carefully sensing what was happening, Yang Kai suddenly came to a realization. It turns out that my karma with the Qian family has been settled. What's left is the more troublesome karma with my parents, as well as the karma with heaven and earth. Luo Fan thought to himself. What happened just now was very simple. In the Qian family's treasury, Qian Tong had used his own strength to break the seal Luo Fan had placed on the golden sphere, allowing the golden sphere to return to its original size, becoming a giant sphere with a diameter of 10,000 meters. This allowed all of the gold to return to its original size and then fall down, directly shaking the ground and causing this kind of tremor. As for why Luo Fan's restriction was broken by Qian Tong, the answer was even simpler. Luo Fan had originally constructed this restriction based on Qian Tong's strength. As long as he casually used his strength, he would naturally be able to break the restriction and restore the golden ball to its original size. The weight of the golden ball was astonishing, but it was enough for Luo Fan to completely settle the karma between him and the Qian family over the years. From now on, he no longer owed the Qian family anything, and the hindrance to opening the gate of ascension had disappeared. Of course, this was only for the Qian family. For his parents in this life, this amount of gold was still not enough. At this moment, Luo Fan frowned and turned to look at the Qian family's main gate. Although there were layers of walls separating them, he could see everything that was happening at the gate. At this moment, at the gate, an old fortune teller was staring at the Qian family's main gate with a burning gaze. So it's here. That immortal really is related to the Qian family. The old fortune teller muttered to himself as an excited smile gradually appeared on his face. It seems like he found out in the end. When Luo Fan saw the old fortune teller's expression, he knew that the old fortune teller had discovered that the gold was in the Qian family's residence. This was a matter of course. As a level 9 mortal realm cultivator whose mental state had already reached the golden immortal realm, the old fortune teller's senses were sharp, his memory was powerful, and his deductive ability was terrifying. Naturally, there was no need to mention it. Although the tremors caused by the heavy object landing on the ground were hidden, they didn't seem to have any special characteristics. Moreover, it didn't seem to have any special characteristics, but it was enough for him to easily deduce how heavy the falling object was and how big it was. After deducing all this, how could he not guess that this was the gold that was about the size of the sphere with a diameter of 10,000 feet? Once he knew that the gold that was taken away by the immortal was in the Qian family, he would naturally know that the immortal who took the gold was related to the Qian family. The old fortune teller no longer concealed his strength and directly transmitted his voice. Taoist Yamano requests an audience with the head of the Qian family. This voice reverberated throughout the entire Qian family, creating an indescribable deterrent force that caused all living beings in the Qian family to tremble. All the living beings in the Qian family could feel the terrifying power of the person who spoke. They could feel how weak they were in the eyes of the person who spoke. When Mother Qian heard the voice, she tightly grasped Luo Fan's hand and said anxiously, "My son, is this your master?" "Mother, you misunderstood. This is definitely not my master's voice. This person is definitely not my master." Luo Fan hurriedly patted Mother Qian's hand and comforted her. At the same time, he frowned slightly. At the same time, he also frowned slightly. Originally, he didn't care about the old fortune teller. Sometimes he would even tease him on a whim. However, now that he had made his mother in this life panic, he was somewhat dissatisfied. Dissatisfied, he stood up and said to Mother Qian, "This person is here to see Father. I'll go and see what's going on." Although Mother Qian was reluctant, she still nodded and said, "Go ahead. Be careful." Luo Fan nodded, got up, and left the room. While he was talking with Mother Qian, the old fortune teller sent another 2 voice transmissions to Yang Kai. When Luo Fan left the room, he saw Qian Tong coming out from the back hall. Seeing Luo Fan, Qian Tong frowned and asked, "My son, is this expert my son's master?" "No, master said he wouldn't come, so he absolutely won't come. This person is definitely not master." Luo Fan shook his head. "Since that's the case, then come with me to welcome this expert." Qian Tong listened to Luo Fan's words, and his expression became quite strange. He seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, but also seemed to become more worried. Hearing Qian Tong's words, Luo Fan shook his head and said, "There's no need. My master's status is extremely noble. This person won't be able to withstand my greeting, let alone my father. Since he has come to see us, then we'll wait for him in the living room." Although Qian Tong felt it was inappropriate, he also felt that his son's master strength was astonishing, so his status was certainly not low. If it was him, it would be fine, but if he brought his son to greet another cultivator, wouldn't it be a big problem if his son's master took notice? Therefore, after thinking about it, he nodded and agreed to Luo Fan's arrangement. Immediately, the two arrived in the living room. Qian Tong sat down while Luo Fan stood to the side, ordering the servants to open the door and invite the old fortune-teller in. At this time, the old fortune-teller's mind was completely focused on finding the immortal. Although the Qian family's behavior was somewhat arrogant, seemingly underestimating his identity, he didn't care too much about it. Following the Qian family servants into the living room, he saw Qian Tong and Luo Fan, who he was very familiar with. He was familiar with Qian Tong and Luo Fan because he had been pretending to be a swindler for several years, but Qian Tong didn't have any impression of him. After seeing the old fortune-teller, Qian Tong stood up and respectfully asked, "This junior is the Qian family's patriarch, Qian Tong. May I ask where senior is cultivating and what brings you to my Qian family?" This old man is an elder of the Hunyi sect, also known as Old Man Tianyi. "Today, I took the liberty to come to the Qian family because there is something I don't understand." The old fortune-teller was very cautious and didn't show any arrogance or disdain towards a cultivator like Qian Tong, who was many times weaker than him. Hearing the old fortune-teller's introduction, Qian Tong couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect. The Hunyi sect was one of the 36 great sects on this continent, and its ranking was even higher than the Supreme Mystery sect. To be able to become an elder of such a sect, this person was at least at the 9th level of the mortal realm. This was thousands of times stronger than Qian Tong himself. "I've seen you before. You're a swindler who often sets up a stall nearby to tell fortunes," Luo Fan interjected. When Old Man Tianyi heard this, he couldn't help feeling a little embarrassed and said, "So, the young Master Qian still remembers this old man. In order to conceal my identity, this old man has indeed pretended to be a swindler for a period of time. I am truly ashamed. How can my son speak to Senior Tianyi like that? Quickly apologize to Senior Tianyi," Qian Tong reprimanded. He naturally didn't really want Luo Fan to apologize to Old Man Tianyi, but under such circumstances, he had no choice but to do so. Otherwise, if Old Man Tianyi were to pursue the matter, it would be difficult to resolve. Old Man Tianyi quickly waved his hand and said, "Young Master Qian is right. There is no need to apologize. There is no need to do so." This time, he had come to ask for help, but he had placed himself in an extremely low position. If it weren't for his own strength, with his current attitude, Qian Tong would even suspect that he was just an ordinary swindler. After a casual exchange of pleasantries, Qian Tong once again brought up the topic of Old Man Tianyi's visit. "Senior, please speak frankly. If I know, I will certainly not hide it from Senior. I believe Patriarch Qian still remembers the astonishing change in terrain 2 days ago. I came here this time to ask Patriarch Qian to introduce me to the expert who collected all the gold." Old Man Tianyi didn't hide anything and directly stated his purpose for coming. These words caused Qian Tong's expression to change greatly. After a moment of fear, a look of understanding appeared in his eyes. Chapter 1063. Qian Tong did not reject Old Man Tianyi's request immediately. Instead, he asked, "May I know why Senior thinks that I know such an existence and can introduce him to you?" Old Man Tianyi wasn't surprised by Qian Tong's question and had already prepared an answer. Thus, as soon as Qian Tong asked this question, he immediately replied, "It's not difficult to guess. If that immortal didn't have a close relationship with the Qian clan, how could that golden ball have ended up in the Qian clan's treasury?" When Qian Tong heard this, his expression changed slightly. Previously, he had guessed that this Tianyi old man had come to find him because of the existence of the gold, so he was already somewhat mentally prepared. However, at this moment, when he truly heard these words coming from Old Man Tiany's mouth, he still felt inexplicably shocked. After a long while, he sighed and said, "So that's how it is. That golden sphere is indeed in my Qian clan's treasury. However, that existence has nothing to do with my Qian clan." Hearing that, Old Man Tiany frowned. However, he did not say anything. In his opinion, Qiantong's words were nothing more than a blatant lie. If there was no relationship between them, who would hand over a 10,000-meter wide golden sphere to someone else? How much gold was there in a golden orb with a diameter of 10,000 feet? That was 300 million tons, or about 600 billion jin. If it was converted into taels, it would be more than 6 trillion taels. 6 trillion gold taels was a huge figure. Even Old Man Tiany, who was at the 9th level of the worldly realm, couldn't help but feel tempted after calculating it. Even an immortal would not casually give away so much gold to a stranger. If that was the case, this gold was now in the Qian family, which meant that the Qian family had a very close relationship with that immortal. Qiantong's words were nothing but blatant lies, so Yang Kai had no interest in refuting them. Moreover, he also believed that Qiantong wouldn't wait for him to refute, and he would definitely have some other explanations to convince him. Qiantong did not disappoint Old Man Tiany. Although there seemed to be an immortal behind his son, Old Man Tiany was still a powerhouse of this world, and the Huni sect behind him was a colossus. Naturally, it was impossible for him to entertain him without fear of death. After saying those words, without waiting or pausing, he continued, "The one who is related to that existence is my son." Hearing that, Old Man Tiany nodded. Zhang Xian was taken aback. Then his eyes lit up. Those burning eyes directly covered Luo Fan, as if wanting to see through all the secrets inside and outside of Luo Fan's body. With a single glance, his expression changed greatly. His expression became solemn and cautious. He stood up, bowed to Luo Fan, and said, "It turns out that little friend has hidden his strength so deeply. This old man has been impolite before." The reason why he was like this was because he had carefully observed Luo Fan earlier, but he had not discovered any aura from Luo Fan at all. Luo Fan stood there, and at first glance, he seemed very ordinary. However, as long as he observed carefully, he would realize that no matter what method he used to probe, sense, or observe, he could not see through Luo Fan's true power. The feeling he got was the same as his first impression, and this was obviously impossible. If someone other than an ordinary person were to use any senses that could penetrate deeper than the eyes to probe, they would be able to obtain more information that they would not have been able to obtain before. They would be able to see things that they had overlooked before. However, the current situation showed that Luo Fan had some kind of power or item that could shield his perception. Regardless of which it was, it meant that the existence standing behind Luo Fan was definitely not someone he could compare to. That was precisely why Old Man Tiany was so respectful. "Old man, you're the one hiding your true strength," Luo Fan said with a faint smile. Since this soul clone had reincarnated into the Qian clan's eldest young master, he naturally had to act according to his identity as the Qian clan's eldest young master. As such, he did not show how powerful he was. He did not reveal the fact that this old man had already seen through his true strength. "You're too kind. I had no choice but to do so. I'm truly sorry for hiding it from you," Old Man Tiany said, still putting himself in a very low position. All right. It's really awkward for an old man like you to act like this. You're here to see my master, aren't you? There's no need to think about it. Since you haven't seen my master yet, it means that he doesn't want to see you. There's no need to say anything else," Luo Fan said indifferently. When Old Man Tiany heard this, his expression changed drastically. Luo Fan's words contained several implications. First, the immortal he was looking for was the Qian clan's young master's master. Second, the immortal had given the gold to Qiantong through the Qian clan's young master. Third, the immortal already knew of his existence, but didn't want to see him. These three implications caused Old Man Tiany's expression to fluctuate. After a while, He unwillingly said, "Little friend, your master hasn't said anything yet, so I still have a sliver of hope. I hope that little friend won't give up and report this to your master. That way, this old man will have a sliver of hope." What is master's cultivation? Since you're here, he naturally already knows. Why would he need me to report this to him? If master is willing to see you, there's no need for me to say anything. If master isn't willing to see you, then no matter what I say, you can forget about seeing him. There's no need to speak of this matter anymore. Luo Fan shook his head. These words left old man Tianyi aghast. Despair appeared in his eyes, but he knew that what Luo Fan said was correct. If he was in any of the nearby mountains and someone said they wanted to see him, he would be able to sense it. He would know who that person was and where they were. If even he could do this, then how could an existence that was far more powerful than him, possibly even an immortal, not be able to do this? Perhaps the moment he opened his mouth, the immortal had already known everything. At this moment, there was no longer any movement. It must be as the Qian clan's young master had said, that the immortal was unwilling to see him. Seeing such a great opportunity in front of him, even the only chance to ascend, yet he was about to miss it. Old man Tianyi's frustration and helplessness could be imagined. The despair in his eyes was absolutely real, causing people to feel an indescribable sense of irritation when they looked at him. "Young friend, you are right, but I'm not fated with you enough," old man Tianyi said with great vigor. In the end, he could not hold back the frustration in his heart and sighed. As he spoke, he cupped his hands towards Qiantong and intended to bid his farewells and leave. Seeing that he was about to leave, Luo Fan said, "Are you leaving now? Since I'm not fated to meet a true immortal, what's the point of staying here?" Old man Tianyi sighed as his voice contained faint despair. "I think that, as an elder of the Hanyi sect, you should be able to protect yourself." He was one of the most powerful cultivators in the world. "Coming to our small border city, you must have something to do. If you leave now, what will you do with the things you want to do?" Luo Fan asked. However, he was quite interested in the appearance of this Qianyi old man. Although the city looked quite huge, it was not a big city. The surrounding area was also quite prosperous. There were also quite a few cultivators. But in the eyes of the entire continent, it was just a small city. There were many cities that were larger than this one. The cultivation environment, there was a world of difference between the mountain gate of the Hunyi sect and that of the Hunyi sect. If there was no need to do anything, no one would rather stay in such a barren land than stay in the holy land of cultivation. Although Luo Fan knew that this old man Tianyi had most likely come to find him, he was very curious as to why this old man knew of his existence and why he was looking for him. It should be known that when his divine soul avatar was reincarnated, it caused a huge commotion. However, he was extremely secretive and believed that no one would be able to find his specific location. However, this old man Tianyi had found this place a few years ago and even seemed to be very sure that he was here. He had stayed for a few years and did not leave at all. This kind of behavior clearly showed that he was very sure. How could this not make him curious? "I have been rude. I still have something to do and must leave first. If Senior has time, I hope that you can give my son some pointers. Qiantong will be very grateful." Qiantong knew that the less he knew about some things, the better. So he didn't wait for old man Tianyi to speak and directly got up to apologize to old man Tianyi. After that, he leisurely left the living room, leaving it to Luo Fan and old man Tianyi. Moreover, when he left, he also took away the servants and guards guarding the door, leaving the living room with no living beings within several dozen meters of it. Although Luo Fan disapproved of this behavior, he was too lazy to stop him and just looked at old man Tianyi. Old man Tianyi was quite satisfied with Qiantong's performance. Before the meeting, he had seen Qiantong here and hesitated, unable to decide whether he should reveal his true purpose for coming here or not. Luo Fan was the disciple of an immortal, and it was very likely that he was the person he was looking for, so there was naturally no problem with him listening to this. However, Qiantong's level was far too low, and these words were really harmful to him. At this moment, Seeing Qian Tong very consciously leave, old man Tianyi breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Little friend, have you heard your master mention anything about the great calamity of civilization?" "I haven't. I only became master's disciple 5 days ago, and apart from passing down knowledge, I didn't talk much with master. So how could I know anything about the great calamity of civilization?" After hearing the words great calamity of civilization, various thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind, but he directly said this. "So that's how it is. It seems that little friend really has a good opportunity." Old man Tianyi couldn't help but feel a burst of envy. In just a short 3 days of cultivation, Qiantong was able to completely conceal his senses. One could imagine how profound his cultivation technique was. With such a profound technique, Qiantong's future was clearly unpredictable. How could old man Tianyi, who had spent thousands of years to cultivate to his current level, not be envious? Since little friend doesn't know, I'll tell you about the great calamity of civilization. Only by understanding what the great calamity of civilization is can I clearly explain how I came to be here. Old man Tianyi sighed with emotion, then stopped his plan to leave and sat down to explain in detail to Luo Fan. At this moment, he was already 60 to 70% sure that Luo Fan was the person he had been looking for these past few years. Since his hope of receiving this person into the sect had been completely shattered, he naturally had to settle for the next best thing, which was to establish a good relationship with him so that the Huni sect would have a better chance of survival in the future. The great calamity of civilization is the tribulation of all sentient beings. Every few years, the great calamity of civilization will erupt. Once the great calamity of civilization erupts, that would be the outcome of the great calamity of civilization, which would result in the extinction of all living beings. Since ancient times, legend has it that the greatest loss was the destruction of 90% of all living beings in the world, old man Tianyi explained. There was a deep sense of reverence in his words. The great calamity of civilization? Luo Fan could not help but frown when he heard old man Tianyi's words. There was actually such a tribulation on this continent. Moreover, it seemed to have formed a fixed pattern. It had actually stabilized to the point that it would erupt at regular intervals. Such a change was really beyond his expectations. It should be known that the great calamity was the result of the entanglement of cause and effect within a short period of time. This was the great calamity of the world. It was also within this category. It was just that the great calamity of the world was at a higher level, a level of chaos. This entanglement of cause and effect was nothing more. If a great calamity could erupt in a world at a fixed time, this meant that the world could be said to be initially complete. The reason for this was not complicated. The entanglement of cause and effect over a long period of time would erupt within a short period of time. This was equivalent to a person releasing poison that had accumulated over a long period of time in a short period of time. It could be said that it was a kind of self-purification and self-improvement process. In other words, a world that could erupt in a great calamity at a fixed time was a world that could self-purify and self-improve. Such a world could, of course, survive for a longer period of time. This was a characteristic that a complete world should have. Therefore, the existence of the great calamity of civilization that appeared at a fixed time meant that the world could be said to be initially complete. This is clearly just an ordinary continent in the dojo. Why does it have such a complete self-evolution and self-improvement mechanism? Could it be that this is also the mystery of this dojo? All kinds of thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind, but the expression on his face only slightly furrowed. There was not much change in his expression. Even a slight frown on Chain's face was a deliberate act. Old man Tianyi did not suspect Luo Fan. Instead, he nodded and said, "That's right. It's the great calamity of civilization. The reason why I came here is that the great calamity of civilization is about to erupt. And I have faintly sensed that one of the main characters of this great calamity of civilization is in this region. That's why I came here and stayed for several years." The great calamity of civilization is about to erupt? One of the main characters of the great calamity of civilization. This time, Luo Fan was really shocked. The great calamity of civilization was about to erupt? He had not sensed any signs of the great calamity from his continent at all. Could it be that the cultivators on this continent had sharper senses than him and could sense the signs of the great calamity that he could not? Also, what was up with one of the main characters of this great calamity? He seemed to be looking for him. Could it be that he was the main character of this great calamity of civilization? Various thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind, and he could not find any clues at all. That's right, young friend, you should have already guessed it. The main character of the great calamity of civilization that I'm looking for is you, old man Tianyi said. Luo Fan shook his head and said, the main character of the great calamity of civilization? I don't think so. I don't think that I'm anything special. However, these are not important. Senior Tianyi said that the great calamity of civilization is about to erupt. Is there any basis for this? If it really erupts, how can I protect the Qian clan? If there's nothing special about you, and you're not the main character, how could you have been taken in as a disciple by the immortals? As for the basis for the great calamity of civilization, I'll have to start from the changes in the world 14 years ago. Back then, it was the year you were born. The atmosphere in the world suddenly changed. In that instant, all the cultivators at the same level as me felt their hearts palpitate, and it only disappeared after a long while. This is the sign of the great calamity of civilization, old man Tianyi said with certainty. Hearing this, Luo Fan did not know whether to laugh or cry. He had been wondering what was going on, but it turned out that the reason was caused by the changes in the world caused by him and the battle god sun's reincarnation. In that case, the great calamity of civilization was probably non-existent. It was a misunderstanding between the many cultivators. For a moment, he could not help but feel relaxed. However, he only relaxed for a moment before his heart jolted and a solemn look appeared in his eyes. I'm afraid this kind of misunderstanding will really cause the great calamity of civilization. Such a thought flashed through his mind. The great calamity was caused by the eruption of the karmic entanglement over countless years in a short period of time. In that case, if all living beings thought that the great calamity of civilization had already arrived, the karmic entanglement that had accumulated over countless years might be triggered prematurely because of their mentality. Wasn't this equivalent to the appearance of the great calamity of civilization? At the thought of this, Luo Fan no longer did not know whether to laugh or cry. Instead, he felt a faint sense of helplessness. The great calamity of civilization that would be triggered would be much less powerful than the actual great calamity of civilization, but it would still be an extremely terrifying calamity. The number of living beings that would die as a result of the calamity would probably reach an unimaginable number. All of this was caused by him and the battle god's son's spirit clones. At the thought of this, Luo Fan felt a faint sense of discomfort. As Luo Fan pondered, old man Tianyi continued to explain to Luo Fan, as for how you'll be able to protect the Qian clan, it'll depend on your luck. Since ancient times, the encounters of the protagonists of the great calamity of civilization cannot be peeped at. Some became the rulers of the world after the calamity, while some died in the great calamity. There are no rules at all. Chapter 1064. After Tianyi old man left, Luo Fan sat quietly in the living room for over an hour. After pondering for over an hour, he had already changed his original plan. Since the civilization disaster was about to happen, he could not just leave like this. He needed to make some preparations for the Qian clan before the disaster. In particular, he had to make preparations for his parents in this life. As he thought about this, he went to his mother's room and said, "Mother, Master just sent me a voice transmission saying that the disaster is coming. In order for me to cultivate without worry, he gave me an item. He said that there's a world inside it, and if things go wrong, I can hide in there. I'll definitely be able to survive the disaster." As he spoke, he handed a pebble that he had picked up along the way to his mother. Just as Luo Fan had said, There was already a small world inside the pebble, which he had opened up on his way here. The world was very narrow, only covering a radius of 100 kilometers. However, the environment inside was extremely suitable for living beings. Although there were no plants or animals in there, as long as an appropriate amount of plant seeds were sown and animals were moved in, it would naturally become a lively refuge. It might not be enough for too many people to survive in such a small world, but it would definitely be enough for the Qian clan's 1,000-odd people to survive for a long time. Opening a world, opening a heaven and earth to the current Luo fan was as easy as flipping his hand. If he really got serious, even with the strength of this soul doppelganger, it was enough to open up a boundless mini Kiliacosm. This time, it was extremely easy for him to open up a small world with a circumference of 100 miles on a cobblestone. Throughout the entire process, no special aura leaked out at all, and none of the nearby cultivators sensed anything when he opened up the world. The pebble looked very ordinary, and its texture was also ordinary. However, after Luo Fan opened up that small world, its body had completely fused with that small world. Unless one had the ability to completely destroy that small world, one would not be able to damage it at all, no matter how great one's power was. Hearing Luo Fan's words, Mother Qian's expression changed greatly, and she hurriedly ran out. She waved away the people who were waiting outside the door. She ordered that no one should step within a radius of 300 meters, or they would be killed without mercy. After that, she closed the door tightly and ran over to pull Luo Fan, saying reproachfully, "How can my son be so careless? How could you say such a thing so casually? If it gets out, it would cause a disaster to the Qian clan. It would cause great trouble to my son. That would be the worst result." But after thinking about it, he did not explain. He just lowered his head and said, "Mother is right. I was too rash." But after thinking about it, he didn't explain. He just lowered his head and said, "Mother is right. I was reckless." At the same time, he was a little moved. When Mother Qian heard the news, she didn't think of anything suspicious, nor was she worried about the Qian family. Instead, she directly believed everything she said. She was even more worried that this matter would bring trouble to herself if it was spread out. Fortunately, the sound just now was not loud, and the people outside should not have heard it clearly. Later, I will ask your father to check. If they heard it, let your father deal with it. Mother Qian frowned and murmured. Luo Fan shook his head and sighed. He was too lazy to care about anything else. He just handed the pebble in his hand to his mother and said, "Mother, you can do as you see fit. You should quickly refine this treasure, lest a long night brings trouble." Only then did Mother Qian curiously take the pebble. Although it was no longer ordinary, this cobblestone was still the same as an ordinary cobblestone. If Mother Qian did not trust Luo Fan, she would not have believed that there was a small world inside this cobblestone. It's amazing. It looks like the pebbles in our yard. Mother Qian sighed. She sensed a little and found that an amazing world appeared in her perception. The world was 100 miles wide, and the world energy was so dense that it had turned into white mist. There are not only rivers, but also a very strange waterfall. Although there were no plants or animals in the world, the scenery was incomparably beautiful. Just by looking at it, one would feel as if they were going to live there for a long time. This was simply a paradise in the legends. For a moment, Mother Qian was stunned. How can the world inside be so vast? This is simply the means of an immortal. Such a treasure is really too precious. After a while, Mother Qian came back to her senses. Her hands were slightly trembling. For Luo Fan, who could open up a boundless world with a wave of his hand, the world of 100 miles was naturally small and insignificant. It almost made him feel like he could not take it out. But for the cultivators on this continent, it was a legendary treasure. Even in extremely exaggerated legends, there was such a big portable paradise. In this way, the value of this pebble in the eyes of Mother Qian could be imagined. Such a treasure, it's better to give it to your father to refine. I am a woman. It is somewhat inconvenient for me to refine this thing. Mother Qian said with an irrepressible excitement in her voice. No, father is the head of the family. He has to consider the future of the family. If this thing is given to him, I'm afraid it will become the common property of the family. Only if it is given to Mother to refine, then it will belong to our family. Luo Fan shook his head and said, "How could that be? Our family is the Qian family. There is no difference." Mother Qian said with a gentle smile, "Mother, don't say anything. Do you think that I still don't know anything?" Luo Fan shook his head and said very firmly, "Any family, as long as it reached a certain level, there would be many factions within the family. There would be many struggles and contradictions. The Qian family, as the cultivation family that controlled this area, had naturally reached a sufficiently large level. Of course, this fate was inevitable. Although Qian Tong was the head of the Qian family, not everyone in the Qian family was convinced of his power. Below him, however, there were still several factions eyeing the position of the head of the family. Although it hadn't reached the point of causing trouble, there were still various restrictions. If this small world was really given to Qian Tong, with Qian Tong's selflessness, he would certainly turn it into the family's property. This could be seen from the reaction of Luo Fan after he gave him the golden sphere. At that time, Qian Tong's family would certainly suffer a lot of restrictions. The other families might even turn from guest to host, making Qian Tong and Mother Qian very unhappy in this small world. Luo Fan gave this small world to Mother Qian. More importantly, it was for Qian Tong and Mother Qian, the parents of his soul avatar in this life. How could he be willing to see such a thing happen? Of course, Mother Qian was not a fool. Of course, she also knew what the Qian family was like right now. She knew what would happen after this small world was given to Qian Tong to refine, but she couldn't say anything in front of Luo Fan. She could only stand there with a conflicted expression. Luo Fan looked at Mother Qian's expression. He knew that he had convinced her. He hurriedly urged her to hurry up. After a while, Mother Qian made up her mind and said, "Good. This is my son's filial piety. I can't let that old bastard father of yours ruin it. Does my son know the best way to refine this treasure?" Luo Fan replied, "It should be like refining an ordinary magic tool. Since Master didn't say anything specifically, it should be like this." Mother Qian nodded, bit her finger, and began to outline a strange and complex rune on the cobblestone with the blood flowing from her finger. At the same time, the power within her body kept surging out and fusing with the rune, causing the rune to glow with an increasingly intense blood-red light. After a while, the moment this rune was completed, the bloody light suddenly flourished and rushed directly to the roof beams, only gradually fading away after a while. The rune that was outlined by the blood also disappeared without a trace along with it, as if it had never appeared in the first place. Why can't this treasure recognize its master anymore? At this moment, Mother Qian suddenly exclaimed and said, "Really? I don't know. But this is even better. They have no reason to force Mother to hand over this world," Luo Fan said with a chuckle. "Petty." Mother Qian looked at Luo Fan's smiling face. How could she not know that he did it on purpose? She scolded him with a smile, but her eyes were full of joy and satisfaction. Obviously, she was very happy with Luo Fan's intentions. This world is still empty. I'm afraid we have to get a lot of seeds and animals to be kept in captivity. Otherwise, I'm afraid it will be inconvenient for us to hide inside in the future. Mother Qian had obtained this grotto heaven treasure, and it was very novel. She said while sensing the world inside, "We have to get some plants with high yield, and the animals have to be meaty and docile. I think that Zhang Niu is not bad. What do you think, my son?" Mother Qian planned. "This is a matter for Mother to decide. I don't understand these things." What a joke. How could Luo Fan get involved in this kind of thing? Of course, he would just push it away. "Oh, I see. Then I'll go and discuss it with your father." Mother Qian saw Luo Fan say this, and didn't force it, immediately stood up and said. After saying that, she hurriedly walked out of the door and went to find Qian Tong. Luo Fan shook his head, patted his body, stood up, and slowly walked out of the door. At this moment, he faintly felt that the karma between himself and Qian Tong's mother had slightly loosened. Of course, it was still far from being truly resolved. We can only see in the future. Luo Fan sighed, called out to Han Er, and went out with him. He was going to leave this place tomorrow and head to other places on this continent to look for places where he could obtain merit and return the karma of this world. Before that, it was naturally best to settle all the karma that he'd sown in this area for the past 14 years. Although he didn't have much interaction with the outside world in the past 14 years, there was still some. Since there was an interaction, there was naturally karma, and it naturally had to be settled. Fortunately, these karma were not too deep, and it was not very difficult to settle them. For most of the day, Shun Dao went to dozens of places. He either taught someone a lesson, gave someone some benefits, or gave someone some pointers, or smashed up a stall, and so on. He did some trivial things and waited all the way until night fell. After finishing everything, he relaxed and returned home. As soon as he got home, Qian Tong asked him to go to the study to meet him. Coming to the study, after a greeting, Qian Tong frowned and said, "Why did you do those things this afternoon? You have never done these things in the past 14 years. Why were you so abnormal before you left?" "This is what Master instructed me to do. He said that I need to understand something like karma." Luo Fan said. "Karma?" Qian Tong frowned, obviously not understanding what karma was. Although the cultivation world of this continent was extremely developed, and there were many theories about karma, but those who really came into contact with karma, only the real high-level people could have a little bit of it. Although Qian Tong was a real powerhouse in this area, he was still very far away from the real high-level cultivators of this continent. However, he was still extremely far away from the true high-level cultivators of this continent. Perhaps he had occasionally heard about karma, but he had no concept of it at all. He didn't know why he had to put an end to it. However, when he thought that this was the order of the immortal, thinking about it, it should be good for his son. He was too lazy to pursue the matter. He immediately let this matter go and said, "Let's not talk about this for the time being. Why did you give the treasure of the grotto heaven that your master gave to your mother to refine? Don't you know that the more powerful the treasure, the greater the pressure on the cultivator? Your mother failed to cultivate. What if something went wrong while refining the treasure? Rest assured, Father, Master has already told me that this treasure is different from others. After refining it, there will be no pressure on the cultivator. Instead, it will allow the cultivator to be cleansed by the world, which is very beneficial to the refiner." Luo Fan smiled. "So that's how it is." Hearing this, Qian Tong slightly relaxed, but his brows did not completely relax. Obviously, there was still something lingering in his heart. Even so, you can't give it to your mother to refine. This treasure is extremely important to the Qian family. It is the key to the entire Qian family to survive the great calamity. It can also be used as the Qian family's treasure. Giving it to a woman like your mother to refine is simply nonsense." Qian Tong scolded. "Father misunderstands. This treasure is not for the Qian family, but for you and Mother. I only want you and Mother to survive this great calamity. I don't care what happens to the Qian family." Luo Fan said. "Bastard!" Qian Tong shouted. His face turned red and his body trembled slightly, obviously angry to the extreme. "What have I always taught you? The family is the foundation of our existence. Without the family, we are rootless duckweed, willow catkins in the wind. There's no hope in this world, no meaning in living. If you didn't have the family, how could you live such a luxurious life today? How could you have such a perfect cultivation environment? If you didn't have the family, let alone you, even I would have died a long time ago. How can you say such shameful words now?" Qian Tong was extremely agitated. Luo Fan listened to Qian Tong's words but remained calm and indifferent, not taking them seriously at all. He had already expected Qian Tong to say similar words, so he didn't even need to think about it, and immediately said, "What Lord Father says is naturally correct. The importance of the family is undeniable. Since you know the importance of the family, why would you say such a thing?" Qian Tong's expression relaxed slightly, but he was still somewhat unhappy. "I am a son of Lord Father and Lord Mother. The family may be important to me, but in comparison, it is only secondary. There is a difference between people who are close to each other and distant. First there is a small family, then there is a big family. If I have any benefits, I will naturally give them to the small family first. If I have extra strength, I will give it to the big family, Luo Fan said lightly. You, Qian Tong pointed a finger at Luo Fan, only spitting out this single word before he was unable to continue. His expression wavered. He was a selfless person who regarded the family as more important than his own life. Therefore, he naturally hoped that Luo Fan would be like him, have the same views and value the family. Qian Tong was naturally very dissatisfied with Luo Fan's blatant statement that the entire family couldn't compare to his small family, and that he could completely abandon the big family for the sake of his small family. However, Luo Fan's words revealed a strong sense of familial love that warmed Qian Tong's heart. For a time, he simply couldn't bring himself to scold Luo Fan. After a long time, Qian Tong sighed and said, "Don't say these words again in the future. If others hear you, they may not say it in front of you, but they will definitely disdain you behind your back." Yes, this child will keep this in mind. Luo Fan smiled inwardly, knowing that Qian Tong had now tacitly agreed with his actions. All right, this matter ends here. Tell me, what did your master say about the Great Tribulation? When will it erupt, and how serious will it be? Qian Tong asked. Master didn't explain this in detail. He only said that this Great Tribulation is the Great Tribulation of civilization. It may erupt in a few years, several decades, several centuries, or even several millennia. As for how serious it will be, it is said that in the smallest civilization tribulation in history, 90% of all living beings in the world will die, Luo Fan said. What? Civilization tribulation? 90% of all living beings will die. Qian Tong had originally been quite relaxed, but upon hearing Luo Fan's words, he couldn't help being shocked and abruptly stood up, his expression becoming somewhat fierce. 90%, and it's still the smallest tribulation? Wouldn't that mean the extinction of all living beings? Can the Qian family really survive such a tribulation? Countless thoughts flashed through his mind, his eyes filled with struggle. Chapter 1065. The next day, Luo Fan lightly left the area where the Qian clan was located and embarked on the process of collecting merit points. As for Qian Tong, as early as yesterday, when Luo Fan told him about the great calamity of civilization, he no longer had any interest in paying attention to Luo Fan. Instead, he began to busy himself day and night. Under his command, the entire Qian clan was like a delicate machine that started up, and it began to become completely different and busy. Even when Luo Fan was about to leave today, Qian Tong didn't even come to see him. Qian Tong's personality of completely putting the interests of the clan above the interests of his own small clan was vividly displayed. Let's see what the Qian family will be like when the so-called civilization catastrophe arrives. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan's figure disappeared into the void and left the area where the Qian clan was located in a way that was completely beyond a range of perception of any cultivator on this continent. In terms of strength, Luo Fan had no problem obtaining merit points. The only obstacle that prevented him from obtaining merit points was finding the point where he could obtain merit points. Specifically, looking for the point where I can obtain merit points is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Although it's not very difficult, it's extremely cumbersome and requires a great deal of energy. As long as I find the place where the karma condenses and reverse the source of the karma, I can naturally obtain merit points. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan's figure landed on a distant mountain range. With a casual grab, he dug out a cave halfway up the mountain. He was only temporarily settling down, so he naturally didn't need to decorate the cave very beautifully. Thus, the cave was just an ordinary cave. The walls inside were also full of bumps and hollows, almost like a naturally formed cave. Luo Fan stepped into the cave and raised his hand. An isolation formation was placed at the entrance of the cave, directly isolating everything inside the cave from the outside world. In this way, no matter what happened inside the cave, it would no longer be transmitted outside. Only the creatures outside could sense it. After doing all this, Luo Fan took out tens of thousands of kilograms of copper ore from the storage space he had opened up. These copper ores were gathered by him with the help of the Qian family's influence. They were specially used as materials for refining magic tools. Although he had casually opened up a small world inside a cobblestone, he felt that these crafting materials were useless to him. In fact, opening up a small world was an extremely difficult and inconceivable task for the cultivators of this continent, but for Luo Fan, instead, it was extremely simple. Relatively speaking, the cultivators of this continent thought that refining magic tools and other treasures was quite simple, but for Luo Fan, it was more meticulous than opening a small world. After all, a pocket world was an existence that involved space and time. Apart from extremely rare treasures of heaven and earth, ordinary refining materials were not very useful for establishing a pocket world. In this way, he naturally did not care about the quality of the materials. He could directly use his own strength to open up a small world among the materials. However, it was different to refine magic tools with other functions. Although it was not difficult for Luo Fan to refine other magic tools, if he used the method of opening up a small world to refine them, it would seem like he was making a mountain out of a molehill. In contrast, it was more appropriate to refine with the help of materials. It was more appropriate. Moreover, more importantly, opening up a small world was a method that this continent did not have. As for refining magic tools with other functions, it was a method that existed on this continent. If Luo Fan wanted to have a deeper understanding of the mysteries of cultivation in this world, opening up a small world would not be of any help. Naturally, he would use his own method. In contrast, refining magic tools with other functions was a method that this continent possessed. Therefore, it could be used as a basis for him to understand the mysteries of cultivation in this continent. It could allow him to understand some of the mysteries of cultivation in this continent. Therefore, Luo Fan collected these copper ores and prepared to refine some magic tools. Now, he was planning to refine this magic tool, although it was only an idea that came into his mind at this moment. However, the root of the problem had been planted a long time ago. Luo Fan's current body cultivated the most profound cultivation method on this continent, the heavenly scripture of primordial chaos. The power cultivated through this method had almost all the characteristics, and the quality was also extremely high. He had a thought. He pointed at the copper ores in front of him. In an instant, the power cultivated through the heavenly scripture of primordial chaos in his body changed its nature. A blazing white fire dragon shot out from his finger and coiled around the copper ores a few times. The flames suddenly exploded and began to burn the copper ores in a frenzy. Under the burning of the flames, the copper ores began to emit green smoke. The copper ores themselves began to gradually melt. In a few breaths' time, they had already shrunk by 100 times, completely turning into a large pool of flashing copper-yellow liquid. The fire dragon wrapped around the copper ores and churned endlessly in the air. Although these copper ores had originally weighed tens of thousands of kilograms, after being refined into copper, their volume had shrunk by 100 times, and their weight had shrunk by more than 10 times. They floated in the air, constantly churning and changing. Under the continuous twisting and changing of the fire dragon, they gradually turned into a sphere. It's still not enough. This is still not the limit of this continent. With that thought, Luo Fan continued to urge the fire dragon. The flames that formed the fire dragon began to gradually change color. The blazing white color became lighter and lighter. In the end, it became completely colorless and transparent. As the color of the flames changed, the temperature in the entire cave began to gradually decrease. In the end, when the flames became completely colorless and transparent, the temperature in the entire cave was actually lower than when Luo Fan had stepped into the cave. It seemed like a large amount of heat contained in the void was being continuously absorbed by the colorless and transparent flames. During this process, the copper ores that were enveloped by the fire dragon began to gradually shrink. Smoke of various colors gradually dispersed from the copper ores. The color of the smoke was very beautiful, as if it contained almost all colors in it. After the smoke floated out of the copper ores, it stained the surrounding cave walls, causing the walls to be gradually dyed with a faint layer of copper-yellow color. It was as if the walls had been contaminated by the smoke. It had already become a copper ore that contained quite a lot of copper. The copper ores itself began to gradually shrink as the smoke floated out. When all the changes subsided, when the flames stabilized in a colorless and transparent state, when there was no more smoke floating out, the copper ores had already shrunk dozens of times, becoming the size of a fist. A small copper ball, and its color had already turned into a golden color. That color was unimaginably pure. It even made people feel that the golden color was purer and more noble than gold. It was as if this small copper ball was thousands of times more valuable than gold. The smoke that floated out of the copper ores just now. It was not the impurities of the copper ores. They were actually also copper. It was just that they were copper of a relatively low quality. This kind of low-quality copper was already an extremely high-quality material when used in the mortal world. But for refining weapons, its quality was slightly lacking. Because of this, it was tempered by Luo Fan. The walls of the cave had indeed turned into copper ores due to the contamination of the smoke. After the colorful smoke entered the cave walls, it began to solidify from its original gaseous state to a solid state, completely fusing with the rocks. Thus, the cave walls became copper ores that could be extracted from copper. Luo Fan looked at the transparent flames and then at the refined copper. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. To him, this refined copper was of course an extremely low-quality material. Usually, he would not even bother to pick it up if it was placed on the ground. However, compared to the cultivation system of this continent, this was already the limit of what a material like copper could achieve. With the cultivation system on this continent, it was impossible to refine the refined copper any further, and the quality of the refined copper could not be improved by even a little bit. Using this kind of material to refine tools could eliminate the influence of all irrelevant mechanisms, allowing the refined magic tools to more perfectly reflect the profound mysteries of this continent's cultivation world. After doing all this, Luo Fan did not stay any longer. He casually pointed, and the fire dragon suddenly shook. It directly condensed into a furnace that looked like an alchemy furnace in midair, directly wrapping the fist-sized, refined copper within it. After the furnace was formed, it began to naturally draw in the laws and laws of this continent. All kinds of strange phenomena began to appear around it. These phenomena were the figures of people. These figures were extremely tall and ancient. Each of them emitted an aura that had reached the peak of a certain domain and could overlook all existences in this domain. They floated in midair, and there were all kinds of faint, strange patterns shining around them, as if they were outlining all kinds of incredible mysteries. These are the cultivators who have reached the peak of the path of tool refinement since ancient times on this continent. The reason why they have appeared now is clearly because the structure of this furnace has resonated with the heavens and the earth, triggering the rule brand that they had branded between the heavens and the earth when they were at their peak. Luo Fan instantly understood the fundamental reason why these figures had appeared. After understanding the reason, Luo Fan was slightly delighted and thought, looks like using this continent's tool refinement method to refine this magic tool is indeed the right choice. After understanding the reason, Luo Fan thought to himself, these imprints on the laws and laws were extremely well hidden and mysterious. If Luo Fan wanted to find them himself, it would be extremely troublesome, and the amount of work he would have to do would be astonishing. How could it be as efficient as summoning them by automatically triggering their resonance? Luo Fan did not stop because of the appearance of these phenomena. He raised his hand and gently drew in the air. Strange patterns were drawn by him and directly engraved on the furnace. As he sketched, strange patterns appeared on the inside and outside of the furnace. With the appearance of each pattern, the figures that had appeared out of thin air became a bit more solid, and there were only a few of them. By the time Luo Fan had drawn hundreds of thousands of patterns and engraved them on the furnace, the entire cave had been completely filled by those figures. Of course, these figures were not the size of a normal person. Instead, They were all the size of a thumb, and they surrounded the furnace in a densely packed manner. It did not seem strange, but as their auras intertwined, it gave off a kind of majesty, shock, and grandeur. Strange sounds reverberated in the cave. These sounds seemed to be the sound of iron hammers striking ores and the sound of various flames burning materials. It was as if countless people were talking about the supreme mysteries of the great Tao. Endless voices echoed in the cave. Mysterious rays of light began to appear out of thin air in the cave and then disappeared into thin air. Following these changes, the entire cave became like a supreme divine realm for tool refinement. Any living being that stepped into this cave would naturally feel an indescribable attraction and naturally burst forth with inspiration, giving rise to countless strange ideas for tool refinement. Such a shocking scene. If it was not for the restriction that Luo Fan had set up at the entrance of the cave to isolate the inside from the outside, perhaps the light would have already filled the surrounding tens of thousands of kilometers. Perhaps even all the cultivators on the continent would be able to sense the wonders of this place. However, even with the restriction that Luo Fan had set up, the mountains still began to shine with strange lights due to the strange scenes in the cave. Because of the mountain's barrier, the light couldn't spread out and scrupulously. From the outside, it looked like a faint light was coming from the mountain. If this scene was at night, it would naturally be very eye-catching, and any living being looking at this place would notice it. However, at this moment, it was broad daylight. This light was so insignificant that only the many living beings on the mountain could sense the changes in the mountain itself. Apart from them, living beings that were slightly further away would not be able to notice the changes here. As Luo Fan looked at this strange scene, all kinds of strange lights continuously shone his eyes. At this moment, the matter of refining that magic tool had become a completely secondary matter. Just the scene in front of him was already worth it for him to be busy. I see. The standard of refining treasures on this continent has already developed to this level. It's only an opportunity to open up a heavenly grotto heaven. Luo Fan sighed to himself. The huge number of figures that appeared in the cave each represented an existence that had walked to the end of the way of refining treasures. The light and shadows around them, the threads, and the various images contained their way of refining treasures, as well as their supreme understanding of that path. Among them, one could see the extreme development of the way of refining treasures in this continent's cultivation system. These extreme developments contain the deep mysteries of this continent's cultivation system, and this was what Luo Fan wanted. As he carefully comprehended these figures, Luo Fan suddenly felt that he did not just have a deeper understanding of the mysteries of this continent's cultivation. He also felt that his way of refining treasures had improved a little. When three people walk together, there will always be a teacher. Luo Fan agreed with this sentence very much. No matter how low one's realm was, they might contain something that could enlighten Luo Fan. Moreover, in any world, if one could be outstanding and stand above everyone else and reach the end of a certain field, they would not be ordinary in any world. If these cultivators could reach the end of the way of refining treasures and reach the peak, it meant that their understanding of the way of refining treasures would not be ordinary in any world. This included the primordial world, the earth, and the universe outside. Luo Fan even dared to say that even in the great Tianyuan world, they would definitely not be ordinary. As long as they upheld this concept and the various principles of refining treasures that they had comprehended, even if they entered other worlds and other worlds, they would still be able to use these comprehensions to obtain extremely high achievements. Even if they could not reach the end, they would definitely not be too far away from the end. With this, and with such a large number, it was naturally extremely useful to Luo Fan. It could allow him to obtain many new insights that he had never obtained before. Luo Fan's comprehension process lasted for 10 days before it ended. During these 10 days, he kept the furnace intact and repeatedly refined the piece of refined copper. He turned the piece of refined copper over and over again, changing it into various strange forms. The refined copper became more and more refined, and there were even faint, strange patterns on the surface of the refined copper. This caused the refined copper to gradually surpass the limits of refined copper, and a faint green color appeared on its surface. The countless shadows around the furnace changed inexplicably as the refined copper changed. However, no matter how they changed, they did not disappear. Instead, they became more and more realistic and lively. After 10 days, Luo Fan let out a long breath. A strange smile appeared on his face, and he raised his hand and pointed at the furnace. In an instant, the furnace shone brightly, and countless strange patterns condensed into a large cloud of threads that pounced into the bronze that had already turned light green. As these threads surged in, the shape of the refined copper gradually changed. From its original spherical shape, it became more and more flat, and its entire appearance became wider and thinner. After tens of thousands of threads were inserted into the fine copper, the appearance of the fine copper had completely changed. It had completely turned into an extremely strange, cyan copper mirror. The moment the copper mirror was completely formed, the entire furnace shook violently. The countless strange figures in the surroundings began to give off a joyous aura, as if all the existences that had reached the peak of the way of refining treasures were cheering for the birth of the copper mirror. At the same time, a brand new figure appeared among these figures. Chapter 1066. This was clearly the furnace that Luo Fan had condensed. After 10 days of changes, it had reached the peak of the path of weapon refinement on this continent. The laws of this continent had naturally engraved the shape of the furnace in the depths of its body. It was like a cultivator who had reached the peak of a certain path that had appeared since ancient times. The moment the furnace appeared among the countless figures, a joyous aura spread out from the cave. Even the isolation restriction that Luo Fan had set up could not stop this joyous aura from spreading out. The area within a radius of several hundred kilometers was enveloped in joy, turning from a wild and primitive place to a peaceful one. Luo Fan looked at the scene before him and smiled faintly. With a gentle wave of his hand, the furnace trembled slightly and disappeared without a trace. However, he did not absorb it back into his body, nor did he dissipate it into nothingness. Instead, he followed the slight connection that the laws of laws had naturally engraved into the shape of the furnace, and sent the furnace into the depths of the laws of laws. He wanted the boundless laws of this continent to take care of this furnace for him. When he wanted to use this furnace, he only needed to summon it from the depths of the laws of this continent with a single thought, and it could appear anywhere on this continent. In other words, he could even create a method that would allow any living being to use this method to summon the furnace and use its power to refine magic treasures. This could be said to have opened up a brand new method of weapon refinement on this continent. The weapon refinement system. With such a furnace hidden in the depths of the laws of laws, it would be enough to create a brand new method of weapon refinement that was completely different from any other method of weapon refinement on this continent. Just this alone was enough for him to establish a sect without needing to reveal any abilities. As the furnace disappeared, the countless lights and shadows in the surroundings also gradually dissipated. The phenomenon of the mountain also gradually disappeared. Before long, everything around the mountain returned to how it had been before Luo Fan had arrived. At that moment, there was only a bronze mirror floating in front of Luo Fan. This mirror looked extremely extraordinary. It was an extremely profound magical artifact. Floating in the air, it naturally gave off an aura that could illuminate everything. Anyone who saw it would feel that it was extraordinary. Luo Fan raised his hand and beckoned. The bronze mirror fell into his hand. This bronze mirror was forged by him. Naturally, he didn't need to refine it. He didn't need to study it to be able to unleash its full power. He raised his hand and pointed at the mirror. In an instant, light and shadow flowed on the surface of the mirror. There seemed to be countless strange colors intertwining with each other. After a while, the entire mirror stabilized, and a complete continent was revealed. This continent was exactly the same as the one Luo Fan was on right now. The various terrains on it, the distribution of various animals and plants, were all detailed down to the smallest detail. It was like a real continent that had been shrunk by who knew how many times. On this continent, most of it was shrouded in fog. Only one location in the northwest was extremely clear. That place looked like a large mountain range. In that mountain range, there was a mountain peak that looked extremely similar to the one Luo Fan was on. It was especially clear. Luo Fan's thoughts moved slightly, and there were 7 spots on the mirror that shone with black light. These 7 spots were scattered across the continent, and they were extremely far from each other. There are 7 spots. Luo Fan looked at the mirror and smiled faintly. What was displayed on the mirror was the map of the continent he was on. However, compared to ordinary maps drawn on paper, cloth, or animal hide, the map on the mirror was much clearer and more detailed. The mountain range that was the clearest on the map was the mountain range that Luo Fan was on. It was also the location closest to the bronze mirror. It was obvious that the most detailed mountain in the mountain range was the one that Fairy Luo Fan was on. As for the 7 spots that were filled with black chi, they were the locations that Luo Fan wanted to explore when he was refining this magic tool. They were the locations that contained great negative karma. They were also the locations where there was a chance to obtain great merit. As for the fog that shrouded almost the entire continent, it was an area that the mirror had yet to explore. After all, the mirror was only a magic tool, let alone Luo Fan's main body. It was far inferior to Luo Fan's spirit clone. Of course, it was impossible for such an artifact to easily sweep its perception across the entire continent like Luo Fan. As a result, it was impossible for the entire continent to be clearly engraved on the map contained within. What it could clearly detect was only the mountain range where the mirror was located. In reality, the fact that the map could roughly detect the outline of the entire continent and the 7 spots with great negative karma was already a testament to the power of the magic tool. The closest spot from here is 330,000 kilometers, but it's not too far away. It's not too far. Luo Fan carefully observed the map on the mirror and instantly decided on his next course of action. After making up his mind, he did not stop. He took a light step forward, and countless runes flashed around him. They carried him towards the closest spot of the 7 spots with great negative karma at an unimaginable speed. The cultivation system on this continent could only allow cultivators to reach below the immortal path at most. Although it had other effects on the mind and cultivation, the level of power was still shockingly limited. With power below the immortal path, it was obviously impossible to easily break free from the restrictions of space and teleport billions of kilometers in an instant. If one wanted to travel quickly, they would have to rely on all sorts of amazing abilities. For example, what Luo Fan was doing right now was condensing the power from the heavenly scripture of chaotic elements into various forms outside his body, drawing upon the laws of this continent. As a result, his speed was greatly accelerated. The method that the elder of the Taishan sect used when he first appeared and disappeared was actually similar. However, the method that the elder of the Taishan sect used was not as casual or as exquisite as Luo Fan's. What he used was a fixed flying ability. Not only was it extremely restrictive, but it also consumed a lot of energy. The distance of 330,000 kilometers, under the guidance of such a wonderful method, was crossed by Luo Fan in the time it took to eat a meal. Is it here? There is indeed something strange. Luo Fan arrived at his destination and floated in midair, looking down. Such a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Here, it was a lake with a circumference of 100 kilometers. The lake was surrounded by mountains. The shadows of the mountains were cast on the lake, making it look extremely beautiful. Anyone who saw it would feel relaxed and happy. However, the scenery of the lake was beautiful, but there was one thing. It made Luo Fan feel that something was wrong. That was the lake was too calm, or rather, it was too quiet. Inside and outside the lake, Luo Fan didn't feel any movement. Insects, fish, water plants, and the like didn't exist at all. Even the side of the mountain near the lake was dead silent. Not even a single plant existed. It looked like a barren mountain. There was no vitality in the lake. There were no animals or plants. The mountains next to the lake had no other vitality at all. How could this be possible in a normal lake? If there was nothing special about this lake, even a fool would not believe it, let alone Luo Fan. It seems that the karma is in this lake. Luo Fan thought to himself. His eyes shone brightly, and the whole world instantly changed along with the changes in his eyes. After changing his eyes, Luo Fan looked at the lake. His eyes directly passed through the layers of lake water and shone directly into the depths of the lake. In the blink of an eye, he went deep into the lake and saw the mud at the bottom of the lake. As he saw the silt, he also saw the almost boundless negative karma. Back then, he saw the strange beast at the place where the river changed its course. Because it caused the disaster of the river changing course, it drowned a large number of fertile fields, killed tens of thousands of ordinary people, and destroyed several villages. Because of that, it was contaminated by karma, died, and its soul dispersed. However, the karma that entangled the strange beast was negligible compared to the karma that existed at the bottom of the lake at this moment. It could be said that there was no comparison between the two at all. It was not an exaggeration to say that the difference was like heaven and earth. How was that mud? It was clearly the existence that had been condensed by the karma to the point that it was almost tangible. Such intense karma, I'm afraid that it would be difficult to accumulate so much karma even if I destroyed the entire continent. Luo Fan was shocked, and his expression changed slightly. Such a large amount of karma was definitely not something that could be accumulated so easily. Just how great of a sin was this? If there is karma, there is naturally a source. Where is this source? How can I eliminate these negative karma and obtain supreme merit? Luo Fan frowned. He took a step forward, and the threads around him flickered. In the blink of an eye, he had disappeared from the top of the mountain. When he appeared again, he was at the bottom of the lake, and he was floating above the karma that seemed like mud. The threads around his body flickered, and they dispelled the pressure from the boundless lake water around him. Meanwhile, the golden merit light wheel directly appeared behind his head, and it floated behind his head while emitting a gentle light. It continuously dispelled the threads of karma that were dispelling the karma that were dispelling from below and contaminating Luo Fan's body. This lake shouldn't have existed. It should have been formed by the accumulation of rain over the years. This should have been a valley. Luo Fan sensed slightly and confirmed the origin of the lake. Based on the shape of the mountains, Luo Fan deduced the original depth of the valley in the blink of an eye. If this is really a valley, with the karma, there's still a space of hundreds of feet before I can reach the ground. As Luo Fan thought so, he raised his hand and gently waved it. The power of the unifying heaven scripture of primordial chaos within his body continued to rush out from the acupuncture points all over his body, intertwining and outlining around his body. In the blink of an eye, it intertwined with the light well behind his head, forming a human-shaped light shield that covered his body. After doing this, he sank directly into the mud below. In other words, it was almost solidified in the karma. As he sank, sizzling sounds came from the light shield around his body and the place where the karma jitsu was located. The light shield that was outlined by his power was a defense formed by intertwining with the merit light wheel. It contained the characteristics of merit, and it was an existence that was almost the complete opposite of the surrounding karma. This complete contrast allowed the light shield to perfectly defend against the surrounding negative karma's corruption. However, it was also because of this contrast in nature that caused the changes between the two of them to be extremely intense, resulting in the sizzling sound that was being produced at the moment. Fortunately, the method used by Luo Fan was extremely clever. Although it was a highly incomparable reaction, although it was an extremely strong reaction, on the whole, neither of them could do anything to the other. Luo Fan's light shield did not collapse because of the impact of the surrounding karma. The surrounding karma did not become chaotic and agitated because of this conflict. Luo Fan looked at the surrounding karma that was getting thicker and thicker. His brows gradually furrowed. Ordinary karma was nothing to Luo Fan and could not affect him in any way. He could even treat this karma as if it were an ordinary power. However, when the karma increased to such a terrifying extent, it was no longer an existence that could not affect Luo Fan. Quantitative change led to qualitative change. There was such a large amount of dense karma. If Luo Fan was submerged by it without any defense, although he would not completely sink because of it, this spirit doppelganger would probably be directly destroyed. From then on, he would no longer be able to obtain any power in this mainland, let alone walk to the end of the mainland's cultivation system. What exactly is it that produces so much karma? Luo Fan frowned and pondered, and his body continued to sink. Due to the obstruction of the dense karma, it took him more than 100 breaths' time to sink to the bottom of the 300-foot height. The moment his feet touched the ground, Luo Fan was shocked. There was a thin layer of space between the ground and the karma. It was about 3 inches high. What existed in this space was not karma, but merit. It was an extremely weak golden merit that had been compressed to the point of almost completely disappearing. It was this merit that formed a barrier 3 inches above the ground, isolating the direct contact between the ground and the karma, allowing the 3-inch gap to exist on the ground. This merit was more than 100 times less than the merit halo behind Luo Fan's head. However, it was extremely solid and tough. No matter how much the karma above pressured and attacked, it did not move at all. It did not change because of any changes in the karma. Luo Fan stood there and observed carefully. Finally, he found the source of the merit. It was a skeleton that seemed to have existed for hundreds of millions of years, emitting a rotten and broken aura. The skeleton was very short and looked like the skeleton of an 8 or 9-year-old child. At this moment, the skeleton was sitting cross-legged on the ground. The merit that had almost completely disappeared was emitted from the skeleton, covering the entire valley within a radius of 100 miles. This prevented the karma in the valley and the ground from completely separating. Although the skeleton was attached to the merit, it was only about the same as the merit on the ground in the valley. It was also a thin layer that wrapped around the skeleton. It looked like the merit was originally floating in the air to support the boundless karma. However, under the strong pressure of the karma, the merit continued to descend until it became a thin film that wrapped around the skeleton and the ground in the valley. Luo Fan's eyes sparkled as he stared at the short skeleton. He walked toward the skeleton step by step. Although there was a thin layer of merit on the ground, emitting a faint golden light, the surrounding karma was too rich. If Luo Fan hadn't sensed the merit and could see the various things on the ground of the valley through the merit, he might not have discovered the existence of the skeleton, and he might not even have been able to see the ground. The skeleton was sitting in the middle of the valley. It was more than 10 miles away from where Luo Fan had entered the lake. Under normal circumstances, Luo Fan could cross such a distance with just a thought. Even if his spirit doppelganger on this continent was countless times weaker than his real body, it would not be too much trouble for him. But at this time, under the pressure of the boundless negative karma, Luo Fan spent more than half a day to walk the distance of more than 20 miles and arrive in front of the skeleton. When he arrived in front of the skeleton, Luo Fan finally saw what the skeleton looked like. This skeleton had the appearance of a born Taoism aptitude. The bone material was crystal clear, and just by looking at it, it was extremely tough and powerful. If any of these bones were to be taken outside, it would probably be enough to be refined into a ritual implement that could make any cultivation clan into a clan heirloom. Luo Fan looked at the skeleton and suddenly felt an indescribable sense of remorse and pain coming from the skeleton. The remorse and pain were so intense that even Luo Fan was affected by the feeling. An inexplicable feeling welled up in his heart. This is a remorse left over from hundreds of millions of years ago. It's the pain in this person's heart from hundreds of millions of years ago. Luo Fan immediately knew the source of the remorse and pain. What could have caused such a powerful cultivator to feel so remorseful and painful? Could this be the origin of the boundless karma? He guessed. Although the skeleton was very short and looked like a child of 8 or 9 years old, Luo Fan did not really think of it as a child. How could this person be a child of 8 or 9 years old if he was able to concentrate his remorse and pain on his body for hundreds of millions of years and temper his bones to such a powerful state? Chapter 1067. Beneath the skeleton, there was a strange aura that was hidden, or rather, suppressed to the extreme. This aura did not belong to this valley, nor did it belong to this continent. In fact, there was a vague feeling that it did not belong to this dojo. There was only one possibility for such an aura, and that was that there was a passageway that led to another world below. In other words, there was a space-time door beneath the skeleton. Is that so? The light in Luo Fan's eyes froze and covered the skeleton. In an instant, the shape of the skeleton continuously changed in his eyes. A layer of flesh and blood that became more and more obvious gradually covered the skeleton, causing it to seem as if time had flowed backwards. It gradually revealed the appearance it had before it was a skeleton. It was a middle-aged man. He was a middle-aged man with an unshaven beard who looked very sturdy and masculine. Although he was extremely short, he did not give off a wretched feeling. The middle-aged man exuded an aura that could break through everything and defeat everything. It was as if he would shatter the heavens in front of him with a punch. The middle-aged man's face was very sorrowful, and his eyes were filled with an indescribable hatred. In a trance, Luo Fan seemed to hear the man roaring at the sky, letting out a mournful howl. Looks like this merit was formed by him suppressing the space-time door. And this boundless karma might be caused by him opening the space-time door. Luo Fan analyzed and guessed the truth in an instant. However, this was only a guess after all. It was just a guess, and there was no definite conclusion. Naturally, he would not take action. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and drew an outline in the air. In an instant, countless threads appeared out of thin air as he drew the outline, forming a light shield in the boundless karma. It suddenly shrouded the place where the skeleton was, directly covering the skeleton in the light shield. This light shield had no effect on the boundless karma and the merit around the skeleton. It had no effect. It was as if it did not exist at all. However, under this light barrier, the strange aura that was produced by the skeleton could not be revealed at all. It was completely isolated by the light shield. Obviously, this light shield, it was targeted at this aura. After the light shield was formed, Luo Fan grabbed at it casually, and the skeleton suddenly shook. It floated in the air. As it floated, a black liquid began to seep out from its original position. The original position of the skeleton was on an ordinary piece of ground. This piece of ground looked the same as the rest of the land on this mainland. There was nothing special about it. However, as the skeleton left and the black liquid seeped out, the ground changed instantly. It seemed like it was gradually becoming a bigger and bigger black hole. Within the light shield, the aura that did not belong to this valley, this mainland, or even this dojo began to grow stronger at an unimaginable speed. At this moment, Luo Fan only felt an indescribable pressure acting on the light barrier from the inside out. This force was directly transmitted back to his body, causing him to feel that his entire body was faintly being shaken more and more. In a trance, he actually had a feeling that his entire body was gradually collapsing. This is indeed a space-time gate, and it's a space-time gate that leads outside the dojo. At this moment, Luo Fan confirmed his previous guess. This aura contained an aura that could not possibly exist in this dojo, an aura that belonged to real flesh and blood. In fact, it was even more intense than the real flesh and blood that existed on Earth in the universe. This aura was completely out of place in this dojo, and it was an aura that could not possibly exist in this place. After all, this dojo belonged to a cultivator who had set foot on the 8th step, and that cultivator cultivated the path of spirits. This entire dojo was a paradise for spirits, and all the living creatures and auras that were born in it were spirits. How could such an intense aura of real flesh and blood exist here? At this moment, Luo Fan felt that the pressure on the light shield was so intense that he could not bear it. In fact, it was not because the increasing aura in the light shield was that powerful and terrifying. Instead, Luo Fan was just a divine soul avatar. His current body seemed no different from a normal body of flesh and blood, but in fact, it was still a soul avatar. It was a body that was completely born according to the laws of this continent. Such a body was the complete opposite of the aura of real flesh and blood. So the impact of the aura was naturally many times greater than normal. That was why he was feeling this way. The moment this feeling appeared, Luo Fan already understood the root cause. With a slight thought, the light shield instantly changed, and the countless threads on it instantly changed their structure. Following this change, the light shield instantly stabilized. Although the aura inside the light shield was getting stronger and denser, its impact on the light shield was getting smaller. There's still karma? All of a sudden, Luo Fan felt that something was wrong. He turned around and saw that the surface of the merit halo behind his head was giving birth to wisps of black light out of thin air. It was clearly the wisps of karma. It turned out that he had only moved the skeleton away, allowing the aura from the space-time door to flow into this world a little more, and he had already committed a crime against the heavens, causing karma to descend from the heavens. It seems that this space-time door is not as simple as it seems. As Luo Fan thought to himself, the merit halo behind his head shook, and the karma directly left the halo, directly condensing into a pitch-black karma halo under his halo. This karma halo was the same size as the merit halo, but it was many times more illusory, to the extent that it could barely condense into a shape. This karma halo was the opposite of the merit halo. The merit halo could allow one to obtain countless benefits. It could make one's mind clear and bring about great fortune. This karma halo, on the other hand, could make one's mind muddled and bring about great misfortune. Of course, this would only happen if the karma halo was directly used on one's body. What Luo Fan was doing now was naturally not the case. He had condensed the karmic light wheel into such a karmic light wheel, which could completely isolate the negative effects of the karmic light wheel on him. Instead, he could use the karmic light wheel as a weapon that could be used on his opponents, greatly affecting all of them. They would become extremely unlucky. Under normal circumstances, this kind of bad luck might not have much of an effect. However, if it happened in a battle, the effect would be so great that it could affect the outcome of the battle, and even affect life and death. For example, if the opponent were to use some kind of supernatural power. Originally, the probability of causing a fatal effect was extremely small. However, because of bad luck, this probability had appeared. Wouldn't it mean that the opponent would directly fail and die? It could be said that just this method of condensing the karma into a karma halo was enough for Luo Fan to establish a sect on this continent, and it was similar to the Tao of weapon forging. If Luo Fan really wanted to cultivate this karma halo to a very high level, he only needed to activate the method here and directly absorb the endless karma that had accumulated in this valley, and naturally, the karma halo would evolve to an unimaginable level. However, it was obvious that Luo Fan had no interest in this. The reason why he condensed the karma into a karma halo was not because it could be used against enemies, but because he did not need to constantly guard against the effects of the karma on him. After condensing the karma halo, Luo Fan once again felt refreshed, and there was an indescribable sense of comfort all over his body. Within the light barrier, more and more black liquid gushed out from the ground where the skeleton was sitting, and in the end, it completely submerged the light barrier, leaving not a single gap within the light barrier. If not for the fact that the light barrier was incomparably sturdy, it would not have been able to contain the black liquid, and it would have directly rushed out of the area covered by the light barrier and spread in all directions. After the black liquid filled the light barrier, the center of the black liquid began to spin. A medium-sized whirlpool gradually appeared in the middle of the black liquid. The whirlpool became more and more obvious, and the area it affected also became wider. After a few dozen breaths, it finally completely stabilized, and the black liquid within the light barrier looked like a huge whirlpool, no longer as calm as it had been before. This should be the door, Luo Fan thought to himself as he looked at the whirlpool. Above the whirlpool, time and space had been completely disrupted, and it had become extremely chaotic. This state had broken the integrity of this space, and the space-time within the light barrier had been torn apart, connecting to a space-time outside of this continent, or even the dojo. Seeing that such a space-time door had appeared in front of him, it was naturally impossible for Luo Fan to directly seal the door without caring about the space-time or the scenery behind it. Even if completely sealing the space-time door would bring him boundless merit, and it was extremely likely that he would completely sever his karma with this world, there was no exception. He pondered for a moment before raising his hand and drawing in the air. The power cultivated from the heavenly scripture of chaos surged out continuously, directly forming an illusory figure in front of him. This figure looked like Luo Fan. This was a projection clone that was formed according to the records of the cultivation system on this continent. This was because all living beings on this continent had spirit bodies, and this continent's cultivation system was also developed based on this foundation. Therefore, in terms of clones, this continent's cultivation system was much more accomplished than other types of worlds. After all, it was obviously much easier to split a spirit body than a body of flesh and blood. The clone projection that Luo Fan had created did not consume much power, but its nature was extremely tough, and it was not much different from his current spirit clone. Moreover, more importantly, even if this doppelganger projection was destroyed, it would at most cause Luo Fan a headache, but it wouldn't cause any damage to him. He would probably be able to recover completely after resting for a quarter of an hour. This was the fundamental reason why Luo Fan had chosen this method of clone projection. After the clone projection was formed, Luo Fan did not hesitate. He directly controlled the clone projection to rush into the light shield. The light shield was condensed by Luo Fan, so it naturally did not affect him at all. It did not stop him at all, and he directly passed through the light shield as if he was passing through light and shadow. Just as his clone projection passed through the light shield, an indescribable pulling force suddenly acted on the clone projection, pulling it into the center of the vortex while spinning. At this moment, the trace of consciousness that Luo Fan had attached to the clone projection lost its perception of time and space. It seemed like billions of years had passed, but it also seemed like only a short moment had passed. The clone projection regained its perception of time and space. He looked around and found that he had already appeared in a strange world. This world was not pitch black. Instead, it was bright and dazzling, and there was peace and joy everywhere in the void. There was an incomparably rich essence in the void. There were also wisps of real aura of flesh and blood in the void. It did not matter whether it was essence or not. It was still the aura of flesh and blood, and the light that filled time and space. They were all very clear and bright. It was a very pleasant light. The sun hanging high in the sky was a dazzling golden sun. Endless golden sunlight shrouded the world, bringing boundless light to everything in the world. Behind the doppelganger's projection, there was a pitch-black vortex. This vortex was more than 10 times larger than the black vortex that Luo Fan had seen in the valley on that piece of land. The entire vortex floated there, displaying an indescribable sense of shock. Luo Fan had been used to the aura of that piece of land and that place for 14 years, and the aura of that place, which belonged to that piece of land, was constantly seeping out of the vortex. Outside the whirlpool, boundless energy and golden sunlight condensed into a golden liquid that poured into the whirlpool, trying its best to dye the whirlpool gold. However, the golden liquid seemed to be restricted by an indescribable power. Although it kept surging in, it could not dye the vortex gold at all. Instead, it surged out from the other side of the vortex and dissipated into essence and sunlight, disappearing without a trace. Heaven for another, hell for me. That's all there is to it. Luo Fan looked at the whirlpool and recalled the whirlpool in the valley. His mind let out such a sigh. The golden liquid was golden bright and contained an endless, auspicious aura in this space-time. It was obviously an existence that was extremely beneficial to living beings. However, after flowing through the space-time door and entering the valley, that piece of land, in that place, everything turned pitch black. Even the living beings who opened the door would be drowned by boundless negative karma. They would die, and their souls would scatter. Such a strong contrast truly brought out the meaning of the sentence to its fullest. Even those who had never heard of the sentence or understood its meaning could directly sense its meaning. Suddenly, a sizzling sound reached Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan lowered his head and discovered the source of the sizzling sound. It was clearly his body, but in this space-time, it was as if his flesh and blood had been thrown into sulfuric acid. There was an intense reaction with the surrounding essence, sunlight, and even the air in the void. His entire body gradually melted as a result of this reaction. In just a few breaths' time since he arrived in this space-time, more than half of his body had already been corroded. He simply looked like a broken body. Luo Fan made a prompt decision. With a slight thought, a stream of consciousness directly separated from a body. The moment his consciousness left the body, the projection clone finally completely melted. It directly turned into a putrid liquid that fell to the ground. Even the liquid was rapidly evaporating. After a few breaths' time, it had already disappeared without a trace, as if it had never been there. Luo Fan could not help but secretly exclaim when he saw this scene with his consciousness. With a slight thought, the endless essence and sunlight in this space-time quickly gathered towards him. Before long, the appearance of a young man in a green robe condensed in the void. It was Luo Fan's appearance. Although this figure still seemed a little illusory at the moment, and one could tell at a glance that it was not a real body of flesh and blood, it already gave off an extremely powerful vital chi. It even seemed more like it was constructed from real flesh and blood than a real body of flesh and blood. What a flesh and blood space-time! Luo Fan could not help but praise. He raised his hands and stretched his legs, but he felt that this body was so real. As he moved, vital chi surged wildly, almost condensing into a vital chi smoke. Just by using the essence and sunlight of this space-time to condense into a body, it already had such a magical effect. One could imagine how powerful the true vital chi of this space-time was. With such a space-time, it was no wonder that this space-time was so in conflict with the dojo. To think that such a space-time portal had actually created so much karma, resulting in such terrifying consequences. Roar! At this moment, an earth-shattering roar sounded. Subsequently, a vital chi that was so dense that it almost condensed into a substance pounced towards Luo Fan. Luo Fan frowned and raised his hand to punch in front of him. Boom! A loud sound rang out, and an indescribable force acted on his fist, causing his body to fly backward. He directly crashed into the mountain next to the vortex behind him. With a crack, the entire mountain shook violently, as if it was about to collapse into countless tiny gravel in the next moment. Chapter 1068. My goodness, he actually gave me such a show of strength. Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. His body struggled and broke free from the restrictions of the surrounding mountains. His body slowly floated out and appeared outside the mountain. He looked in the direction where the attack came from. Even though the impact from before caused him to feel a sharp pain in his body and caused his vision to darken, it did not affect his willpower much. As for his body, it was obvious that it was formed from his will and the surrounding yuan qi and sunlight. As long as his will was not affected, all the injuries to his body would naturally not last for long. With just a slight thought, he could completely heal them. In that direction, there was a strange creature standing there at this moment. The creature was 30 meters tall. It looked like a human, but its arms were extremely huge. They were completely disproportionate to its body. Those arms made it look extremely strange and shocking. The head of the creature was in the shape of a human, but it looked extremely insane. Its eyes flickered with a violent battle intent and killing intent. The aura surging around it made it seem as if it wanted to tear everything in its surroundings apart and destroy the entire world. Roar! The creature faced the sky and let out a wild roar. The blood and chi in its body surged and instantly formed an incomparably real smoke signal that soared into the sky from the top of its head. It scattered the clouds in the sky and formed an extremely obvious hole in the clouds in the area where Luo Fan and the creature were. After roaring, the creature stomped on the ground, and there was a loud rumble. The entire ground seemed to tremble as if an extremely strong earthquake had occurred. The creature traversed hundreds of meters in an instant and arrived in front of Luo Fan. A fist that was the size of Luo Fan's entire body directly shot towards Luo Fan when it arrived in front of him. When Luo Fan saw this, he knew that he had suffered a punch like this. This punch was not a simple one. The surging blood was like a strong flame, causing his willpower to tremble. If his willpower had not been firm and stable, the surging blood on the fist might have been enough to erase his willpower. Faced with such a punch, Luo Fan lifted his foot and stomped on the ground. His body seemed to have become invisible in an instant. He bypassed a mysterious, complicated, and profound path and easily bypassed the creature's fist. He charged up along the creature's arm and punched the creature's head. There was a loud rumble. The creature let out a miserable howl. It was as if his entire body had been hit by a mountain. He flew tens of thousands of meters away before suddenly landing on the ground. The moment he landed, the ground shook as if there was a strong earthquake. After the creature landed on the ground, it took a while for it to react. He let out another roar. This roar contained a different willpower from the previous ones. It contained hatred and anger, but more than that, it was a summoning. Is it summoning its own kind or its superior? Luo Fan was a Tao master. Although it was only a trace of willpower of a spirit incarnation, his eyes and senses were no different from his real body. Naturally, he could hear the willpower contained in the roar. He was very interested in it. This creature's chi and blood were extremely strong, even comparable to the existence of the individual immortal realm. It was several times stronger than other spirit incarnations. However, its spiritual intelligence was too poor. No matter how strong it was, it could not be destroyed. For Luo Fan, it was just a sculpture that was difficult to destroy. As long as he took it seriously, it would not be a threat to him. In this type of situation, this creature summoned its own kind or its superior, yet it didn't have any intention of worrying. On the contrary, he instead felt extremely expectant, wishing to clearly see what exactly was going on in this world through these changes, what profound mysteries there were. At the moment when the creature roared, an inexplicable wave suddenly appeared out of thin air. This wave was not an ordinary sound wave or even a light wave, nor was it a strange vibration wave. It was a kind of space-time wave. It was a kind of wave caused by some kind of vibration in time and space, resulting in some kind of change. This wave was extremely hidden, and the frequency of its appearance was fast and short. It appeared hundreds of times in an instant. Sensing this fluctuation, Luo Fan's eyebrows furrowed, but he became slightly nervous. All the changes in front of him were somewhat beyond his expectations, but he needed to pay more attention to them. Under the space-time wave, in front of Luo Fan, there were suddenly hundreds of strange creatures around the giant creature. These strange creatures were of all kinds, and each was different from the creature that appeared first. However, he could faintly see that they had something in common. This common point was that all of the creatures had amazing chi and blood. Each creature, even the weakest one, had chi and blood comparable to the existence of the individual immortal realm. The strongest one even had chi and blood at the perfected immortal realm. Hundreds of such chi and blood appeared in this narrow space, and in an instant, the surrounding space-time completely distorted, causing countless strange scenes to appear in the surrounding space-time. These scenes did not have a fixed form. Each form was very abstract and difficult to understand. It was impossible to describe them with words. However, the feeling these strange scenes gave people as a whole was valiant and real. It was a kind of valiant life essence, a kind of reality of existence. After these hundreds of creatures appeared, they roared at the sky together with the creature that appeared first. Then, they raised their fists and blasted at Luo Fan. The roars of each creature sounded very monotonous on their own. They could only contain some relatively simple emotions, such as anger, hatred, mania, or madness. Although there were all kinds of them, they were all strange, but on the whole, they were similar to the roars of creatures without intelligence. However, when their hundreds of roars interweaved together, an unbelievable change occurred. All the roars interweaved together, forming an extremely strange language. This strange language was something Luo Fan had never heard before. It was a language that he had never even imagined. This language was complicated, precise, and profound. When Luo Fan heard this strange language, he instantly understood the true meaning of this language. He understood what the hundreds of strange creatures were saying after their roars interweaved together. Extraterritorial demons. Die. This was the sentence formed by the hundreds of strange creatures' roars interweaved together. It was a sentence that Luo Fan could not imagine. All the roars interweaved together to form a language. However, their attacks were not individual attacks. Although they were launched individually after they attacked, they followed an extremely subtle pattern. Extremely profound rules interweaved and finally formed a whole, forming a fist that was only 1 zhang in diameter and was completely condensed from qi and blood. With a method that transcended time and space, it directly smashed in front of Luo Fan. Although Luo Fan had already seen this fist, his body had just been condensed. Although his will was strong, it was difficult for him to truly unleash it. He could not react in time at all, and the fist directly landed on his body. It was a soft poof. Luo Fan's body completely collapsed under the fist's attack, turning into countless tiny particles that dissipated in all directions. In the blink of an eye, he completely disappeared. Although Luo Fan's will did not completely collapse under the fist, it was also extremely strongly agitated. It was sent flying, and in an instant, it crashed into the mountain that his body had crashed into. This caused the mountain to collapse with this collision, turning into countless tiny particles that poured down in torrents. After a while, it turned into a pile of sand. The fist that was formed from the attacks of the hundreds of strange creatures was shattering Luo Fan's body. After sending his will into the mountain in front of him, it did not disappear, nor did it directly hit the ground due to the lack of control, causing any serious consequences. Instead, it was like a power that was perfectly controlled by a powerful cultivator. Without any wastage, it hovered where Luo Fan's body originally was and did not move an inch further. What a weak extraterrestrial devil. You're so weak, yet you dare to invade my 10,000 spiritual realm. The hundreds of strange creatures roared again, and all their roars formed this sentence. If the previous roar had made Luo Fan suspicious, then the roar this time made Luo Fan completely confirm that these hundreds of strange creatures that did not seem to have much intelligence individually could actually display a rather high-level intelligence as a whole. 10,000 spiritual realm? I think it should be called the 10,000 beast realm. Luo Fan smiled faintly. His will gathered the fragments of the mountain and formed the figure of a young man in the void. He faced the hundreds of strange creatures from afar. He did not use any special language, but directly transmitted his will through the vibration of his voice. His voice did not seem like a language at all, but it could allow any living creature to receive the will contained in his voice, and thus understand what he was saying. Although most of these living beings had humanoid appearances, their intelligence was obviously very low. With such intelligence, they could not be called humans at all. They could only be called beasts. Beast was not a neutral term, but a term that was almost derogatory. For normal living creatures, unless they had no other choice, they would not call themselves beasts. Therefore, if this space-time was originally the 10,000 beast realm, then the living creatures in this world could only call it something like the 10,000 spiritual realm. It was because of this common sense that Luo Fan made such a bold guess. You extraterrestrial devils' derogatory way of addressing the 10,000 spiritual realm only shows how weak you are. The collective consciousness of the hundreds of strange creatures said. This let Luo Fan know that he had guessed correctly. This space-time was indeed called the 10,000 beast realm. You think I'm an extraterrestrial devil, but I think you're also an extraterrestrial devil. Luo Fan grasped the key point in the living creature's words and said, the extraterrestrial devils who opened this door back then seemed to have the same intention. They also said that they wanted to coexist peacefully with us and help each other, said the collective consciousness. Hearing that, Luo Fan knew that the collective consciousness was talking about the person who suppressed this space-time door. Isn't that good? Although we see each other as extraterrestrial devils, we don't have absolute hatred for each other. Helping each other out is mutually beneficial. Why not? Luo Fan understood his meaning and asked lightly. Ha! The strange language formed by the hundreds of roars sounded like laughter. After a while, it said, helping each other out? Peaceful coexistence? I didn't expect the extraterrestrial devils to be as naive as the last one. Haven't you thought that since heaven and earth want us to see each other as devils, it means that heaven and earth want us to be enemies from birth? If that's the case, we can coexist peacefully and help each other out. That's going against heaven. That's going against heaven's will. How can we do something as suicidal as that? When Luo Fan heard that, he came to a sudden realization, but he also didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He came to a sudden realization. He understood why the skeleton was so regretful and in so much pain back then. However, after he opened the door, he discovered that the living beings in this world were completely different from what he had imagined. Just because of the difference in the characteristics of the two worlds, they treated the Taoist right sight as an irreconcilable enemy. They had to fight to the death with it. When he opened this door, he opened a door that could cause a world-shocking catastrophe to the world. It was conceivable that once this door was completely stabilized, when the power of this world continuously flowed into the other world, a world-shocking war would break out. The living beings that would die because of this would be counted in the billions and trillions. If that was the case, how could that person not be regretful? How could he not be in pain? That boundless karma, how could it not appear? I see. No wonder, no wonder. What a pity. Luo Fan sighed. That person has been suppressing the door for billions of years, making me wait generation after generation. Finally, I see hope in this life. As long as we destroy you, the door will no longer be obstructed, and the power of the all-spiritual realm will continuously flow into the demon realm, completely erasing everything in the demon realm, so that the all-spiritual realm will obtain endless merit, so that the whole world can achieve supreme sublimation. So, for the bright future of the all-spiritual realm, go to hell. Go to hell. That roar was condensed into a language that said so. As they spoke, the hundreds of strange creatures instantly launched another attack. The fist formed by the fusion of the attack suddenly increased by 7, and these fists were not just fists. Behind the fists were wrists, arms, and so on. All of them were condensed, and with a violent momentum, they directly blasted toward where Luo Fan was. The movements of these 8 arms were extremely profound, and they contained boundless and exquisite battle instincts. It was as if they were instincts that had been accumulated through countless years of battle. As they moved, time and space could not obstruct them at all, and instead became their weapons. As they moved, the infinite power of time and space turned into all kinds of incredible power, crushing toward Luo Fan. Together with the attack of the 8 arms, the power of the attack increased by 1,000 times, making Luo Fan suddenly feel as if he was fighting against the battle god sun. It should be known that among the hundreds of creatures, even the weakest had chi and blood equivalent to the realm of individual immortals, and the strongest had chi and blood equivalent to the realm of perfected immortals. Together, They were at most equivalent to the relatively powerful realm of perfected immortals. Compared to the battle god Sun, who had already set foot on the third step, this kind of power was more than 100 million times weaker. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan actually saw the shadow of the war god Sun in his fighting techniques. What kind of inconceivable fighting instinct was this? Luo Fan had suffered an attack once, so he naturally knew how terrifying this attack of the strange will was. However, he was not unable to react like the last time, and was smashed into pieces. Instead, his entire body flashed in an instant, and his figure easily passed through a layer of space-time gap that should not have existed. He easily bypassed the finger attack, and directly came behind the hundreds of strange creatures. The distance between them was no different from before. Roar! The hundreds of strange creatures roared. Their voices combined to form a kind of roar, but there was an additional sense of disbelief in that roar. It was as if the will formed by the hundreds of strange creatures could not believe that its attack would miss, and that the extraterrestrial demon in front of it had dodged its attack so easily. After the roar, the 8 arms that had yet to reach the end turned slightly, and in an instant, they bypassed 8 trajectories that were hundreds of times more exquisite and mysterious than before. They bypassed tens of thousands of feet and directly blasted in the direction where Luo Fan had reappeared. It still treated space-time as a weapon that could be molded at will, as if it did not need to pass through time and space to arrive around Luo Fan. Luo Fan still felt the terrifying pressure of the surrounding space-time, which made him almost unable to move. Although this method was 100 times more exquisite than before, it was still the same type of method after all. It did not pose any threat to Luo Fan at all. He also took a light step, and his figure easily bypassed tens of thousands of feet and arrived in another direction. Impossible! The will formed by the roars of the hundreds of strange creatures roared wildly. The 8 arms constantly flickered in the void, constantly attacking Luo Fan, who was constantly changing his position. In a few dozen breaths, there were already millions of attacks. After these millions of attacks, even though the will's control over its power was extremely exquisite, and each attack did not completely destroy space-time, there were just too many attacks, and the frequency of the attacks was just too fast. It caused the surrounding space-time to become extremely distorted, and there was even a faint gray luster flashing in the space-time. Chapter 1069. The great consciousness's battle instinct was extremely exquisite, and it even made Luo Fan think of the battle god Sun, who had cultivated the battle path and set foot on the third step. However, that was only the battle instinct after all. Although its battle power was extremely shocking, in terms of changes, it was far inferior to the battle ability that had been tempered and raised to the level of Tao. In other words, although the battle instinct was limitless and could completely destroy a world if it was fully unleashed, it was rather monotonous. For ordinary living beings, one move could completely deal with it without any ability to resist, so such monotonous moves were naturally nothing. However, for an existence like Luo Fan, as long as he saw it once, he would naturally understand the law of the changes in this kind of fighting instinct. He would then know how to fight against an existence with this kind of fighting instinct. Thus, he would be able to easily dodge all the attacks like Luo Fan was doing at this moment. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan was able to utter such words and appear so carefree and at ease. The great consciousness was furious. Although it had never been systematically taught its battle techniques by powerhouses, it had accumulated over hundreds of millions of years after all. Even the individual consciousnesses that formed the great consciousness had changed over hundreds of millions of generations. With such a method, it had not felt powerless for many years, and it had not felt the shadow of failure. However, at this moment, the person in front of it actually said such words in such a regretful tone. How could it endure such an encounter? For a moment, it roared crazily. Space-time fluctuations continuously reverberated. Then, strange living beings crossed space one after another and directly appeared around the hundreds of strange living beings, causing the number of living beings that formed the Great Consciousness to increase at an unimaginable speed. As the number of living beings increased, the Great Consciousness gradually materialized. Originally, the Great Consciousness could only sense the existence of the Great Consciousness from the combination of all the roars. But at this moment, when the number of living beings increased to tens of thousands, the Great Consciousness had already condensed and turned into a huge, strange existence that seemed to contain the characteristics of countless living beings. It looked like a beast, but not a beast, like a human, but not a human. It directly hovered above the many strange living beings, and its huge body seemed to completely overwhelm all the living beings below. After this creature was formed, the space-time fluctuations stopped for a while and directly calmed down. Then, the creature formed by the Great Consciousness raised its head to the sky and roared. Then his body shook violently. The 8 arms condensed from the divine abilities of many living beings suddenly moved and began to dance in the air. In an instant, they created worlds after worlds that blotted out the sky and crushed down on Luo Fan. Although it is tens of thousands of times stronger than before, its essence has not changed. With such a method, it is impossible for it to defeat me. Luo Fan sighed. His figure flashed, and he easily dodged the crushing force of the 8 worlds. Because the power he exerted was too terrifying, even though he was able to unleash 8 worlds that he couldn't before, the result was that the power was beyond his control. Therefore, the Great Consciousness couldn't stop the 8 worlds from moving after Luo Fan dodged and continued to crush towards Luo Fan's position. In an instant, the void collapsed and time was cut off. The 8 worlds were completely destroyed in an instant. Along with the destruction of the 8 worlds, the space-time within a radius of dozens of miles was also destroyed. The space-time within a radius of dozens of miles was destroyed. It completely turned into nothingness, and not even fragments appeared. It was completely turned into nothingness. In this nothingness, an aura that Luo Fan was very familiar with gradually spread out. This aura was the aura of the continent that he had stayed in for as long as 14 years. The appearance of this aura clearly meant that after the space-time was shattered, a space-time passage that led to that continent was formed. The moment the passage was formed, Luo Fan suddenly felt an inexplicable kind of merit condense out of thin air. This kind of merit was very strange, and it made him feel very uncomfortable. It vaguely repelled the merit light wheel that existed behind his head, and its nature seemed to be more like the karma light wheel that he had condensed. At this moment, the Great Consciousness suddenly flashed, and an endless amount of merit condensed towards him, directly condensing into a strange form above his head. It was a throne that seemed to be constructed out of gold, flashing with dazzling golden light. It looked extremely noble and mysterious. When the throne appeared, the light on the body of the Great Consciousness resonated with it, as if they were exchanging something. Due to this change, the body of the Great Consciousness gradually shrank and condensed. Not long after, it turned into a golden human figure. In other words, it was a golden-born Taoism body. The throne directly sank and came behind him as if it was directly delivering itself to him, allowing him to sit on the throne. Merit, boundless merit, enough merit to condense into the divine throne of merit. Ha ha, I finally got this merit. I finally broke free from the restrictions of 10,000 spirits, and from now on, I have my own real body. Good, good, good. The human figure touched his own body and looked at the throne he was sitting on. He was stunned for a while, then suddenly laughed out loud. This merit is the merit of this world. In other words, this space-time passageway really does lead to the land that is almost the complete opposite of this world. The merit that I've obtained now is obviously equivalent to the negative karma that I've obtained from that land, so it naturally repels the merit light wheel. Luo Fan sighed. With a thought, he secretly sensed where the space-time passageway led to the land. He could not help but feel helpless when he sensed it. This passageway led to the land. It was not one of the 7 places with boundless negative karma that he had sensed with the help of the bronze mirror. Instead, it was a place that was quite close to the valley, at most 100,000 kilometers away. However, this place was not a valley, but a mountain. This door was directly open in the mountain, and the entire mountain was currently on the verge of collapsing. There were countless living beings on it that had died and disappeared, turning into nothingness. Apart from this, he also sensed that the negative karma light wheel of his spirit clone had suddenly increased by a few hundred times due to this change. Although it was not as much as the negative karma that originally existed in the valley, it was still quite considerable. It directly suppressed the merit light wheel that existed behind his head, making the originally huge light will seem to have shrunk a lot. I originally wanted to obtain merit, but I didn't expect to attract negative karma instead. Things are really unpredictable in this world. Luo Fan sighed. His figure flickered, and in the blink of an eye, he had already arrived above the newly opened space-time passageway. Do you want to destroy my merit? At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out. At this moment, the golden figure that was formed by the consciousness in the sky snorted coldly. As he spoke, the golden figure had already appeared in front of Luo Fan in an instant. The way he appeared was naturally so casual that there was no trace of him. Even Luo Fan could not see how he appeared. He only felt a golden light flash before him, and he had already appeared. With the protection of heaven and earth, controlling a part of the rules of heaven and earth makes it even more difficult to deal with than before. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. I don't have time to waste with you now. So, get out of the way. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved gently. A supreme force was directly generated out of thin air, directly blasting the golden figure from left to right. Luo Fan's attack was like an antelope hanging its horn, untraceable to the extreme. It was a mysterious and profound place. He had already displayed the martial arts principles that he had comprehended to the extreme. Even the battle god Sun had to be careful with such a method, let alone this existence who only had battle instincts and some power of the world. In the blink of an eye, the golden figure was sent flying by Luo Fan, instantly opening up the entrance of the space-time passageway. This entrance of the space-time passageway was different from the previous one. It was like a whirlpool. This entrance was completely different from the previous one. It was extremely calm, looking like a round mirror floating in the air. The shattered space-time around it had already completely returned to normal, leaving only this passageway that had already opened up between 2 space-time passageways. Golden sunlight and boundless yuan qi continuously flowed into this mirror-like passageway. After it flowed into the mountain, it turned into a black liquid and continuously soaked the crumbling mountain. The color of the mountain gradually changed, and the mountain was gradually assimilated by the black liquid. "You're courting death," the golden figure roared. In the blink of an eye, the tens of thousands of creatures that had been summoned let out wild roars. These wild roars intertwined with the golden figure's voice, and it was as if they were echoing and resonating with each other, causing the two's auras to increase greatly. It was as if the entire world was trembling along with them. Following this change, the golden throne behind the golden figure suddenly changed shape, turning into the shape of a mountain, directly suppressing Luo Fan. The throne was a form of merit. This mountain was also a form of merit. Among them, the throne represented a kind of status, representing a kind of protection from the world. The shape of the mountain represented suppression, destruction, and the suppression and destruction of the people that the mountain faced. Just now, the throne behind the great consciousness had given it a status that allowed it to truly take on a specific form in the world. This was also the fundamental reason why the great consciousness could transcend the shackles of 10,000 beasts and only exist in the illusory world. With such an inconceivable amount of merit transformed into a form of suppression and destruction, one could only imagine how powerful it would be. Faced with such an attack, Luo Fan frowned. This doppelganger projection only possessed a trace of his true body's will. Due to the fact that it had only been formed for a short period of time, it was only at the 9th level of the mortal realm. Although its power was quite terrifying, in terms of strength, it was not even comparable to that of any one of the tens of thousands of strange creatures. Of course, the feeling of such a body facing the suppression of the giant Merit Mountain in front of him was not very pleasant. Although Luo Fan tried his best to dodge, in the end, he was still grazed by the edge of the giant mountain. Just this graze was enough to completely destroy half of his body, leaving him with only his head, one shoulder, one arm, half of his chest, and half of his abdomen. An unimaginable pain came, causing his eyelids to twitch a few times. At this moment, the merit that he had just obtained that belonged to the world and the space-time naturally changed. Boundless Yuan Qi gathered and instantly healed his injuries. In the blink of an eye, his body had returned to normal. However, in this way, the merit that he had originally obtained was not much. The merit that belonged to this world had been reduced by as much as half. It was obvious that it had been consumed to repair his body. The merit of this space-time is actually responding to this. No wonder the great consciousness is so obedient to the will of the heavens. It must have obtained considerable benefits from the merit, Luo Fan thought to himself. As he thought about it, all the problems that he had previously been unable to figure out suddenly became clear. Why was the great consciousness so convinced that the nature of the two spacetimes was different, and that it was the will of the heavens that wanted the two spacetimes to fight against each other? Why was it that after obtaining the merit, it naturally condensed the merit throne, allowing it to turn illusory into reality and break away from its original shackles? It turned out that the merit of this world was more direct than the merit of other worlds and space-times. The reason was even more obvious. I am a main force that opened the passage, and the majority of the merit is on me. Although you have obtained some merit now, it is simply insignificant compared to what I have gained. Let's see how many times you can withstand the consumption. The golden figure said coldly. As he spoke, the giant mountain formed by the merit throne suddenly turned and suddenly blasted towards Luo Fan. This giant mountain did not have any shocking momentum. It looked ordinary, like an ordinary artificial mountain pressing down on Luo Fan. This, vaguely, already had the charm of a magic treasure that surpassed the pinnacle of the quasi-sage level. However, it was only a charm. Although it was condensed by boundless merit, its power was extremely terrifying and extremely shocking in this space-time. Compared to a magic treasure that truly surpassed the pinnacle of the quasi-sage level, it was still billions of times weaker. It was simply not an existence that could be compared to a magic treasure of the same level. Luo Fan's martial arts attainments were earth-shattering. Just now, his first attack was able to be brushed by the giant mountain. Once again, it appeared to be much easier. As his figure flickered, countless afterimages appeared in the void. It seemed that he had barely avoided the violent crushing of the giant mountain again and again. Seeing Luo Fan's actions, the great consciousness was extremely furious. As the giant mountain trembled, countless afterimages also flashed past. Suppressing the afterimages that Luo Fan had created tried to completely suppress Luo Fan. Unfortunately, in the end, Luo Fan's skill was still a notch higher. After an hour, he was still alone in this world. How dare you? Stop right now. At this moment, the golden figure, who was also the great consciousness, roared when he had the upper hand. At this moment, Luo Fan was standing in an extremely delicate position. Looking at the golden figure, a faint smile appeared on his face as he said, "Why can't I do this? The opening of this passage has allowed you to obtain boundless merit. I want to know, if I were to seal this passage, how much merit will you have left?" As he spoke, he lifted his foot and gently stepped on the ground. In an instant, countless threads and innumerable patterns on the ground began to shine with a strange black light. The black light was so rich and profound that it seemed to contain countless universes and boundless heaven and earth. Anyone who saw the light would naturally feel an indescribable feeling, as if they had fallen into an indescribably strange realm. Within the light, the countless threads and innumerable patterns seemed to have been activated. They began to swim and flow according to an extremely complicated and abstruse trajectory, gradually forming an extremely complicated and strange shape. It gave off strange space-time ripples that gradually spread out, completely drowning out the space-time within a range of hundreds of kilometers. The space-time passage that seemed like a mirror happened to be in the center of this area. As for the space-time portal that had existed in the beginning, although it was not wrapped up in it, it was not far away from this area. If Luo Fan wanted to wrap it up, it did not seem too difficult. However, Luo Fan had his own plans, so he left it outside. This formation was condensed and constructed by Luo Fan, using his will to link with the power of space-time, while he was dodging the Merit God Mountain suppression for over an hour. The power contained within was extremely obscure and tough. Before the entire formation was completed, it was completely hidden, completely fusing into nothingness. It was precisely because of this that the greater consciousness only discovered the existence of the formation when it was about to be activated, and thus let out such a strange roar. After the formation was completely activated, the space-time ripples that filled it became more and more intense and more obvious. They gradually began to condense and shrink towards the center. The great consciousness roared and controlled the mountain made of merit to attack the formation in a frenzy. The mountain's attacks were earth-shattering. If every attack completely erupted, it would be enough to cause terrifying consequences that could destroy space-time. However, the result of the attacks on the formation was something that the great consciousness had never expected. Every time the mountain peak attacked, it didn't shake any of the patterns or threads of the formation. On the contrary, every attack caused the space-time ripples in the formation to instantly increase by a level. It was as if all the attack's power had been completely converted into the formation's power. Chapter 1070. Amidst the boundless space-time fluctuations, the mirror-like space-time in trance gradually shrank. In the end, it completely disappeared at a certain moment. Its speed was dozens of times faster than the original speed of the formation that Luo Fan had set up. This was clearly due to the boost effect of the attack from the consciousness, causing the might of the formation to be greatly increased, allowing the result that would have taken a longer time to be completed at a faster pace. This was also why Luo Fan had said that. The golden figure formed by the consciousness hovered in the air. He could not help but feel disheartened at the unexpected scene before him. The regret at the bottom of his heart was so strong that he could not even maintain the stability of the light around him, revealing his golden face. At the same time, the despair in his eyes also appeared in Luo Fan's eyes. At this moment, a faint black light appeared out of nowhere on the golden figure and spread at an unimaginable speed. His body turned dark gold in an instant. At the same time, the god of virtue throne behind him was also contaminated by the black light. After a few breaths, the golden god of virtue throne collapsed with a loud bang. Ghostly wails and wolf howls instantly soared into the sky. The entire sky seemed to be covered by endless dark clouds. There was even a faint stench coming from where the god of virtue throne used to be. It seemed like the collapse of the god of virtue throne had triggered endless misfortune and caused an obvious reaction in the entire space-time. The great consciousness let out a blood-curdling scream. His aura started to weaken at a speed visible to the naked eye. He wasn't the only one. The 10,000 strange creatures that formed the great consciousness also started to struggle frantically during this process. It was as if some invisible existence was searching their bodies for something. It was as if they were constantly losing something of utmost importance. Incomparably mournful howls rang out continuously. Many strange creatures couldn't bear the pain and rolled around on the ground. Some even attacked their companions in a frenzy. The scene became extremely chaotic. It was extremely bloody. Luo Fan stood on the ground and quietly watched the tragic scene unfold. A faint smile appeared on his face. The response of the spacetime's merit isn't all good. If it was in another spacetime, it definitely wouldn't be so tragic or so fast. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. At this moment, some strange black light also appeared out of nowhere on his body. This was the karma of the world. As soon as the black light appeared, all of the merit that he had acquired from heaven, earth, and time was completely tainted. It completely drowned out the merit of the world in the blink of an eye. Then, the karma started to infect his body and pull him into the deepest abyss of depravity. The great consciousness did not take the initiative to block the space-time passageway, but it still obtained such a shocking amount of karma, causing the divine throne of virtue that he had obtained to collapse. He was the one who took the initiative. How could the great consciousness compare to the bad karma he obtained? However, in the face of such karma, Luo Fan only smiled. With a thought, the merit light well behind his head trembled slightly and began to spin. However, in the face of such bad karma, Luo Fan only smiled slightly. With a slight thought, the merit light well behind his head shook slightly and began to rotate. As the merit light wheel rotated, the boundless karma seemed to be attracted by a black hole and was crazily sucked into the light wheel. As the light wheel spun, more and more karma was sucked into it, and the light wheel continued to grow. As the light wheel spun, more and more karma was sucked into it, and the light wheel continued to grow stronger. In the end, when all the negative karma had been poured into it, the light wheel seemed to have become solid. Its size had even reached a diameter of 30 meters, which was even more terrifying. It floated behind his head, but it was connected to the ground and 30 meters above the sky. The degree of shock really made people feel an indescribable pressure when they saw it. Karma of another, my merit. With this much merit, it should be enough to repay the karma of the world. Luo Fan smiled and thought to himself, if the karma of the world was placed on the mainland that he had lived in for 14 years, it would be merit. Now that he had obtained so much karma here, it was equivalent to obtaining the same amount of merit on the mainland. And with the karma that Luo Fan had formed with the heavens and earth on that continent, this merit should be more than enough to settle it. Boom! A shocking explosion in the air interrupted Luo Fan's thoughts. Within the explosion, space-time shook as if it had been completely torn apart. Luo Fan looked up and discovered that the body of the greater consciousness had exploded, turning into countless dark golden powder that scattered in all directions. Even the divine throne of merit disappeared without a trace. The instant the greater consciousness's body exploded, 80% of the 10,000 strange creatures that formed the greater consciousness exploded as well. Not only did the pieces of flesh and blood cover the ground within a few kilometers, but they also caused the originally flat ground to be densely packed with thousands of deep and shallow pits. How dare you destroy my merit? You deserve to die. At this moment, an extremely repressed, furious, and hateful voice descended from the sky. It was the voice of the greater consciousness. However, at that moment, not a single one of the remaining 2,000 strange creatures below roared. Instead, strange roars rang out in the distance. The roars were different from before. It was clear that they were from two completely different groups of creatures. The roars were also different from the voice of the greater consciousness that entered Luo Fan's ears. The greater consciousness's voice was spoken by itself, and it was not composed of roars. Luo Fan turned his head and looked towards the source of the sound. A humanoid shadow was suspended in midair, and the position of its eyes revealed a kind of frightening light. The greater consciousness actually didn't dissipate. Looks like you've preserved a lot of benefits. Luo Fan knew what was going on as soon as he saw the figure, and he sighed with some regret. The greater consciousness was able to maintain its human form. Although it was only a projection, it was already very different from when it first appeared. It was clear that the greater consciousness had not been retracted due to the dissipation of the merit. All of the benefits that it had obtained from the merit were still real, and it had broken away from the state where it could only exist among all living creatures. Dying, the consciousness roared and raised both of its hands up high. As it raised its hands, the remaining 2,000 strange creatures below were enveloped by an invisible force. They suddenly floated up and collapsed in the air, turning into a large pile of blood mist that spread out and enveloped the world within a radius of 1,000 kilometers. Following this, the blood mist began to surge violently. An indescribable power spread out from the blood mist, madly attacking the space within a 1,000-kilometer radius. It caused the space within a 1,000-kilometer radius to tremble violently. Space shattered inch by inch as it trembled, and time twisted and changed madly. It seemed like it was going to completely destroy everything. He wanted to completely shatter this entire space-time, thus achieving the goal of completely erasing Luo Fan, who was wrapped within it. Facing such a large-scale attack, Luo Fan frowned slightly. Although he had enough merit to return the karma of the continent, relatively speaking, it was equivalent to having enough karma for this world to completely erase him. Moreover, the power that formed his body was just the simplest and most ordinary yuan qi that existed in this space-time. The body formed by such power, his main body, and even his soul clone that had cultivated for more than 10 years were far inferior. They were far inferior. If the surrounding space-time really collapsed completely, his clone projection would definitely not be able to escape and would be completely erased by this attack. Luo Fan's eyes flickered with endless wisdom. Countless mysterious principles poured down from his eyes, and countless inexplicable and complicated changes were constantly being seen clearly by him. In an instant, a faint smile appeared on his face. In that instant, countless thoughts flashed through his mind, and he found a way to escape. That way was not anywhere else but the space-time door. It was the space-time door that led to another continent, the one that he had passed through to enter this space-time. At this moment, that space-time door was also enveloped within a radius of 1,000 miles. In other words, the space-time there was also being destroyed by the blood fog, and it was also heading towards destruction and extinction. However, that was a space-time door after all, and the space-time there was different from normal space-time. Moreover, the great consciousness subconsciously had some misgivings and did not want that space-time door to be completely destroyed. The impact of the space-time passage's destruction on him was a lesson learned. So not only could the blood fog's power not be fully unleashed there, but its power was also relatively small. This difference in power gave Luo Fan an opportunity to take advantage of. He could use the gap between the two different powers and some mysterious method to escape the shroud of the blood fog and escape. As soon as he thought of this, Luo Fan's body suddenly collapsed and directly turned into a will. He did his best to wrap up a bit of the blood fog's power around him and went around an extremely mysterious and extremely repetitive path in the blood fog. In an instant, he traversed a distance of hundreds of miles and directly arrived at the edge of the space-time door that was like a vortex. After following the direction of the vortex for tens of thousands of times, a strange change in space-time occurred. In an instant, Luo Fan's will disappeared from the area enveloped by the blood fog and directly passed through space-time, arriving at a location that was more than 10,000 miles away from where the blood fog was. When it reappeared, a loud cracking sound rang out. 10,000 miles away, the area where Luo Fan was originally had completely collapsed. A huge black hole directly appeared there, and the endless matter in the surroundings was frantically sucked into the black hole, constantly filling in the gaps of the black hole. After a while, the black hole gradually disappeared, and normal space-time was revealed. However, at this time, a large area in the vicinity had been completely wiped out. Even the area where Luo Fan's was located, which was 10,000 miles away from that location, was affected, and the surrounding terrain changed greatly. It left quite quickly. Luo Fan looked around and could not help but sigh when he did not find the big consciousness. He knew that the big consciousness had already left when the blood fog enveloped that area. The big consciousness itself was formed by the gathering of the will of many living beings in one place. Usually, before it appeared, it would break up into pieces and disperse into the bodies of many living beings in the space-time. When it was needed, it would condense from pieces into a whole. Now that it had left this place, it could be said that the big consciousness did not exist at all, not to mention finding it. Therefore, it could be said that Luo Fan had completely lost the opportunity to capture the big consciousness. Unless the big consciousness condensed itself, he would have to completely wipe out all the living beings in this entire space-time in order to harm the big consciousness. You're lucky, Luo Fan sighed. His figure swayed, and endless vitality and sunlight condensed around him, forming a somewhat illusory figure in the blink of an eye. However, it was a human figure that exuded a strong blood chi. At this time, he had already put aside the matter of dealing with the big consciousness. As for the big consciousness, Luo Fan did not have a good impression of it. If it was in front of him, he would definitely not be stingy and kill it with a slap. However, that was all. He actually did not have much hatred for the big consciousness, at least not to the extent that it wanted to wipe out all the living beings in this space-time. Since it had not reached that stage yet, he naturally did not have the mood to deal with the big consciousness that had already broken up into pieces. This space-time is really mysterious. I wonder if it's that cultivator's dojo or another space-time outside the dojo. Luo Fan looked at the surrounding world that was full of vitality and thought to himself. At this time, although he already had enough merit points to return the karma of the mainland, he did not immediately want to leave this space-time. It was not easy for him to come to the space-time that he was interested in, of course. He would not waste it to leave before he had a clear understanding of it. He lifted his foot and took a light step. As his blood chi surged, his figure came to the mid-air 100 miles above the ground. Looking into the distance, the entire area of the space-time was boundless. Even with Luo Fan's eyesight, he could not see the end of it. And in this space-time, there was nothing else but an omnipresent forest and ancient trees. And in such a space-time, there was nothing but an omnipresent forest and ancient trees. Whether it was mountains, hills, plains, valleys, or mountains, at a glance it was all green. So, it's a space-time that is completely a forest. Luo Fan looked at this strange scene. His eyes showed a look of understanding. Although a space-time that was directly a large forest was not common, Luo Fan had seen many. He had a deep understanding of the characteristics of such a space-time. A space-time that was full of forests must contain unimaginable vitality. If not for that, these trees would not be able to grow normally. The reason why this space-time seemed so special, and even the void was filled with such a strong aura of blood and flesh, was obviously because of the special transformation of this vitality. Luo Fan lifted his foot and took a light step in the void. The blood chi around his body surged, and rays of red light flashed under his feet. His figure then walked in a way that seemed slow, but was actually fast. Above the void, he walked in a certain direction. That direction was none other than the direction from which the big consciousness had launched a destructive attack on him. The direction from which the roar came. That direction was completely opposite to where Luo Fan was now in the space-time portal. Therefore, in order to reach that location, he had to pass through the space-time portal, which was the location that had been completely destroyed within a radius of 1,000 miles. This space-time portal still exists. When passing through the space-time portal, Luo Fan looked down and could not help but be slightly surprised. Although the space-time portal had shrunk by 1,000 times and looked like it was only the size of a fist, it still existed. It was still connecting the space-time and that continent, stubbornly connecting the two space-times together. Looks like he really has some misgivings. Luo Fan smiled and directly came to a conclusion. Under normal circumstances, if the blood mist destroyed the space-time within a radius of 1,000 miles, even if the space-time portal was 10 times bigger, it would be completely destroyed in an instant and cease to exist. However, at this moment, the portal still existed. It was obvious that the person who attacked had consciously protected the portal. After laughing, Luo Fan did not stop. He lifted his foot and took another step, directly passing through the ruins within a radius of 1,000 miles, and continued moving forward. Very soon, he arrived at a location that was more than 100,000 miles away. There was a big river here, and on both sides of the river, there were two completely different types of trees. Even the auras on both sides were extremely different, giving off a completely different feeling. It was as if the river divided two completely different worlds. Looks like it's just as I expected. That big consciousness isn't the only big consciousness in this space-time. It's just this territory, or rather, the collective consciousness of all the living beings in this area. There are other big consciousnesses in other territories, Luo Fan thought to himself as he sensed the difference between the two sides of the river. In fact, he had this thought when he saw how huge this space-time was. Chapter 1071. Luo Fan searched carefully and found traces of hundreds of strange creatures in the forest. Not long ago, these creatures had gathered at his current location. Now, they had scattered everywhere, and he could no longer see any connection between them. It seems that they deliberately chose this place to transfer the conflict to the consciousness of the opposite area. Luo Fan thought, but he didn't care. He lifted his foot and took a light step, his figure directly crossing the river. The moment he crossed the river, the many creatures in the forest below seemed to be driven by an inexplicable will, and they all looked at him. However, for some reason, they only looked at him and did not do anything. Seeing this, Luo Fan knew that the giant consciousness in this area had some scruples. At least, it was not willing to deal with him for the time being. He chuckled and took a step forward. Chi and blood surged around his body, and in the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of a creature that was the size of a hill and looked like a tiger or leopard. He looked up at the creature and said, "I wonder if fellow friend can come out and meet me. I have something to ask you." The creature roared, and its eyes glinted fiercely. A pungent smell came at him, causing Luo Fan to frown. However, he did not do anything and waited patiently for a while. After the creature roared, it stared closely at Luo Fan. After a while, it roared again. Along with this roar, there were a few other roars nearby. These roars intertwined and formed a strange sound. They combined into an inexplicable consciousness. "Outsider, you are not welcome here." The voice used the same language as the great consciousness from before to speak these words. "I don't want to step into this place. It's just that you opened a hole in my world, so I had no choice but to step in here," Luo Fan said with a smile. "I didn't open that hole." The few roars intertwined in the void and said, "Perhaps, since you don't welcome me, I hope you can answer my question. After I get the answer I want, I will naturally leave." Luo Fan chuckled. Even though he was facing a powerful living being that was as large as a hill and had the vital energy and blood of a bodiless immortal, he was still extremely calm. He did not seem to be bothered by this strange living being at all. The calmer he was, the more cautious the consciousness of this region became. Although the previous battle between Luo Fan and the other consciousness took place in another area. However, the consciousness had also sensed the state of the battle through various methods. He put himself in the shoes of the great consciousness. However, he realized that even if he were to face Luo Fan, the result would not be any better than that big consciousness. Because of this, when Luo Fan stepped into his zone, he only stared at Luo Fan. However, it did not take the initiative to attack like before. Even Luo Fan unceremoniously stepped forward to summon him. Although he behaved rather impolitely, he did not welcome him, but he still appeared. Now that he saw how confident he was even more fearful. After a while, he said, "What do you want to know?" He did not want to have a conflict with Luo Fan. He wanted Luo Fan to quickly ask his questions and leave immediately. After all, there was no enmity between him and Luo Fan. At least, there was not such a strong enmity between them. Moreover, he believed that he could not deal with Luo Fan, so Luo Fan was just an eyesore in his zone. If answering some questions could send him away quickly, he would not be against it. In this space-time, are there any forbidden areas or extremely special locations? Luo Fan did not care what the great consciousness thought. As long as it was willing to answer his questions, he had achieved his goal. Hence, he asked directly, "So you want to die?" "That's easy. There are a total of 18 forbidden areas and forbidden areas for living beings in this world. No living beings have ever been able to leave these forbidden areas unscathed. Even living beings like us who are controlled by our wills will be completely cut off after entering. If you want to die, these are the most suitable places. The roars formed this sentence. Luo Fan's eyes lit up. There are 18 of them? That's great. Fellow Taoist, please tell me where they are. The great consciousness harumphed coldly and said no more. Soon, the sound of rushing wind could be heard. Then, a bird-like creature flew over from the distance with a stone slab in its beak. It flew towards Luo Fan like a bolt of lightning, landing in front of Luo Fan in the blink of an eye. It spat out the stone slab in its beak, then turned and flew away, disappearing without a trace. Those are the locations of the 18 forbidden areas. Do as you please. The roars intertwined, saying that the strange tiger-leopard creature in front of Luo Fan turned and darted into the forest a few times before disappearing. Luo Fan expressed his thanks and picked up the stone slab. The stone slab was carved from an extremely strange stone. There were countless strange vein patterns on it. At first glance, the vein patterns seemed to be in a mess, as if there were no rules or records of anything. However, upon closer inspection, Luo Fan discovered that the countless vein patterns intertwined to form a strange existence. In the end, they formed a strange message. This kind of combination was almost identical to the way the consciousness was constructed. It was clearly the most primitive way of storing information in this world. It's quite an ingenious method. Luo Fan could not help but sigh in admiration when he saw the profoundness of the stone slab. The way the stone slab stored information was quite ingenious, and he had not expected it to be so. It did not even contain any extraordinary power. Even an ordinary person, after knowing the method, would be able to easily use it, easily create this kind of slate, and use the same recording method to store information. However, such a method opened up a whole new world in front of Luo Fan. It gave him a vague understanding of the development of the mortal world, which was different from the cultivation civilization or technological civilization. This kind of civilization might be called the vein civilization. If the use of these vein patterns is expanded, it should be able to form illusions that can take on special forms. In the end, they can form all kinds of weapons and exert all kinds of different powers. I can even build these vein patterns on my body and transform my body. In the end, I can sublimate the essence of life and obtain a long life. Luo Fan thought. He had already thought about the possible development if this method of recording information was grasped by ordinary people. All these thoughts flashed through his mind in a flash. However, he had absolute confidence. He was confident that this would be the way things would develop. If these vein patterns were really grasped by ordinary people, they would definitely develop in this way. However, such thoughts flashed through his mind. He had only thought about it for a moment. Perhaps in the future, he would have the opportunity to test whether a mortal society would develop in this way after obtaining this method. However, at this moment, he was more concerned about the information recorded on the stone slab. It was the location of the 18 forbidden zones for life. With a slight thought, he instantly grasped the information. A huge map appeared in his mind. This map was a map of this space-time. Of course, this map was not complete. The truly complete part was only a very small part of it, which was about a few 100,000 miles in radius. Apart from that, most of the areas were blurry, and he could only vaguely see the rough outlines. On this huge map, there were 18 very conspicuous locations in the blurry areas. However, they were only roughly marked. Apart from these locations, there was nothing else. These must be the 18 forbidden zones for life. With this thought, Luo Fan locked onto the nearest forbidden zone. He lifted his foot and stepped forward. Qi and blood surged around him, and the vein patterns around him constantly flickered. As the vein patterns flickered, his figure floated in that direction like an immortal. At this moment, the vein patterns that appeared around Luo Fan were very strange. These vein patterns were constructed from Yuan Qi, and each of them was very random. There seemed to be no connection between them, and the structure of all the vein patterns did not seem to follow any rules. However, when all the lines were combined together, they produced all kinds of incredible effects. They guided the endless yuan qi in the surroundings, guided the golden sunlight that shone down from the sky, and even controlled the boundless aura of flesh and blood that existed in the void. With this, Luo Fan was able to move forward in a more relaxed manner and at a faster speed than before. This was what Luo Fan had obtained after some deduction using the method of recording information on the stone slab. It was the fundamental mystery of this world and space-time. This method was also named by Luo Fan. It was a method that allowed the veined civilization to develop to its limit. The reason why Luo Fan used such a method at this time was actually a kind of experiment between his thoughts. The result of the experiment was rather gratifying. It made him feel that the repulsive force of space-time against him had become much smaller. What method is this? It looks so familiar, but I don't think I've seen it before. The consciousness thought after Luo Fan left. Roar! At this moment, a loud roar rang out from the other side of the river. These roars interwove into a voice. It belonged to the consciousness that had first fought against Luo Fan. Shan Huang, why did you let that evil spirit leave? Don't you know that killing him will give you endless merit? It might even allow you to transcend the shackles of all living beings and turn nothing into reality. Shan Xing, don't think that I don't know what you're planning. Don't you want me to fight that person and suffer a heavy blow, just like you, so that you can take advantage of me? You're not stupid, and I'm not stupid. Why would I do what you want? The roar of the strange creature on the other side of the river shook the heavens. The consciousness that had just conversed with Luo Fan spoke. I never thought that Shan Huang, who thought that he was an invincible hero, would actually be so cowardly. He didn't even dare to fight, thinking that he would definitely lose. It turns out that the one who has been in a stalemate with me all these years is actually such a coward. I was wrong about you. That Shan Xing, who was also the first person to fight against Luo Fan, said, Coward? Hee, do you think I'll fall for this kind of childish provocation? Even you can't defeat that person. I've been locked in a stalemate with you for so long. Do you really think that I could defeat that person? If I really fight that person, it won't be brave and fearless. It'll be because I don't know my own limits. I'll be seeking my own death. The Shan Huang said indifferently. You, Shan Xing, was rendered speechless by these words. After a long while, he said hatefully, Do you really think that I'm inferior to that demon? My previous failure was due to bad luck, falling into his trap. If it was a normal battle, he would have been completely wiped out by me in the first exchange of blows. Is that so? Why do I see that you've been completely played by him? You don't even have the strength to fight back? The Shan Huang said disdainfully. Which eye of yours saw that? His strength is so weak. Even one of my clones can easily crush him. If it was a real fair fight, he definitely wouldn't be able to take even one of my attacks. Shan Xing roared angrily. While he was roaring, that area seemed to have experienced an earthquake. Almost all the creatures roared at the same time. The interweaving sound was incomparably loud, and it seemed that the entire area had been overturned. I didn't think that the existence that I've wanted to eat for so many years would be so ignorant of reality and his own existence. If I had known that you were such an existence, perhaps trillions of years ago, I would have completely devoured your area. What a pity, what a pity. The Shan Huang sighed continuously. The mutant beasts on the other side of the river also roared continuously. It was just that all of their shouts were filled with regret. If you want to make a move now, that's fine too. I'll wait for you, Shan Xing said coldly. You've already broken free from the shackles of all living beings, and your life essence is already slightly higher than mine. Even though your power isn't that great, it's already very difficult to erase. There's no meaning in taking over your territory anymore. What a pity. If I had made a move a few years ago, the situation would have been completely different, the Shan Huang said regretfully. Living beings with large consciousnesses like them had a very special characteristic compared to ordinary living beings. They viewed all the living beings in a certain area as the cells that made up their bodies. When the consciousnesses of all living beings were combined together, they formed their consciousnesses. This way of existence allowed them to possess unimaginable lifespans. As long as the living beings in that area didn't go extinct, they would never die. In fact, even if the living beings in that area died one after another and were replaced by a new batch of living beings, it wouldn't be a big deal to them. It was just like how the cells of an ordinary person's body were completely replaced by a new batch of cells. It wouldn't affect their consciousnesses at all. However, that was only when living beings died one after another. If all living beings died in a short period of time, it would be fatal to them. It would be able to completely destroy their consciousnesses and bodies. This was also the only way to destroy enemies in this space-time. However, when a large consciousness was like Shang and transcended the shackles of all creatures through some kind of method, turning their consciousnesses from nothingness into reality and becoming independent of living beings, the situation would be different. Living beings in such a situation were equivalent to ordinary people breaking free from the shackles of their bodies. Although they would no longer need their bodies, it wouldn't make them very powerful either. However, it was already enough for them to survive for a short period of time after their bodies died. If they used some special methods, they could even change bodies to continue living. This ability to survive was more than 10 times stronger than when the soul had not broken free from the shackles of the body. It was the same for Shang. When his consciousness condensed into a specific form, his ability to survive became 10 times stronger. Even if the mountain phoenix killed all the living beings on the other side of the river, Shang could still invade the living beings in other areas and use them to escape the fate of death. Evidently, if he didn't kill the snake, he would be harmed instead. If the mountain phoenix didn't kill him after destroying all the living beings in Shang's territory, he would have to bear the mountain phoenix's constant revenge in the future. He didn't know when he would be destroyed. This was clearly not an outcome that the mountain phoenix was willing to bear. It was precisely because of this that the mountain phoenix seemed so regretful at this moment. Just when you knew your opponent's weakness and were confident that you could defeat them, you realized that you had already lost the ability to kill them. This outcome was clearly very regretful. So you actually saw so much? Shang was shocked. However, very soon, he flew into a rage and said, "Do you really think you've got me? Why don't we give it a try? Let's see if you're stronger or if I'm stronger. There's no need for this. There's no point in fighting like this without an outcome," the mountain phoenix said indifferently. "No, if you don't tell me everything today, I won't let this matter rest." Shang roared. "All right, although I'm not afraid of you, it's better not to fight meaningless battles. Since you want to know so much, I'll tell you," the mountain phoenix said. "Speak." Shang was extremely agitated and furious at this moment. How could he be in a mood to listen to the mountain phoenix's nonsense? Chapter 1072. At this moment, Shang was already trembling with fear. The onlooker sees more clearly than the player involved. When he fought with Luo Fan earlier, he was completely blinded by the merit that he was about to obtain. He only saw that Luo Fan was inferior to him, but he did not see the essence that Luo Fan had revealed. At this moment, when he was reminded by Shan Huang and recalled the entire process of the battle with Luo Fan, he was horrified. During the course of the battle, Luo Fan's body was destroyed more than once, and his will was revealed more than once. During the 2 times when his will was revealed without any concealment, the supreme charm that the will gave off was even more noble than his will, which had existed for hundreds of millions of years. If that demon had displayed its will and allowed me to attack it, would I have been able to deal fatal damage to it? Shang asked himself. That answer made him feel very hurt. He didn't have a shred of confidence at all. He knew that with his attacks, his abilities, and his methods, he might be able to injure the will a little, but if he wanted to completely erase it, he would probably have to control the will without any resistance for tens of millions of years before he could do so. Obviously, that was not going to happen. Furthermore, even if he could deal with this will, how could the consciousness of an existence that could nurture such a will be so weak? Just how powerful was the owner of that will? Just how much more powerful was he? Just thinking about it made him feel despair. If he really erased this will, then once the owner of this will arrived, what awaited him would probably be a fate worse than death. After Shan Xing thought this through, the idea of fighting to the death with Luo Fan that he originally had in his heart completely disappeared. At this moment, he was even incomparably glad that Luo Fan had lost interest in him and had left his area. At the same time, he had completely lost interest in the space-time door that existed in the region he was in. That kind of space-time portal could bring him boundless merit. However, no matter how much merit there was, it was all for naught if one did not have a life to enjoy it. For a moment, the area on both sides of the river became quiet. Although there were the occasional roars of strange creatures, they had already become simple roars. They were no longer intertwined into a great consciousness like before. As for the things that happened in the two regions after he left, he had no idea. If Luo Fan wanted to know, it would not be troublesome. But he didn't care about it at all. At this time, he followed the route marked on the map in his mind and headed toward the restricted area of 18 that was closest to him in the forbidden area of 18. The reason why he wanted to search for the forbidden zone of life was because he wanted to understand the truth of this space-time. He had to find out the true mystery of this space-time and determine whether this was a space-time within a Taoist right ground or a space-time within another Taoist right ground. If one wanted to find the answer, it would be very difficult to find it in other peaceful areas because everything was very stable. Only in a life-forbidden zone that was clearly different from other stable areas would there be a higher chance of finding the answer. As for the forbidden zone of life, it might be dangerous for the living beings of this space-time. For Luo Fan, it was just a small matter. It was not a big deal at all. As he headed toward the life-forbidden zone, Luo Fan crossed several forest areas that were similar to the areas controlled by the two great consciousnesses, Mountain Phoenix and Mountain Walker. These areas were also controlled by the great consciousnesses. However, they only stared at Luo Fan vigilantly through the eyes of the living beings. None of them made a move against him. Obviously, they were worried about Luo Fan and did not have absolute confidence that they could completely defeat him. Of course, Luo Fan was happy to see the performance of these great consciousnesses. His understanding of the great consciousnesses was already quite sufficient. Now, he was not in the mood to provoke the great consciousnesses to find out the mysteries of the great consciousnesses. After spending more than an hour, Luo Fan walked a distance of hundreds of millions of miles and arrived outside the life-forbidden zone. Here, like other places in this space-time, it was also like a forest. However, compared to other areas, there were no signs of the existence of the great consciousnesses here. The aura here was incomparably natural. When he arrived here, Luo Fan did not feel like he was being watched. He felt like he was being watched vigilantly. The boundary between the life-forbidden zone and the normal area was a circular bulge that looked like a mountain peak. It formed the terrain of a waterless lake. The highest point of the bulge was the boundary between the inner and outer areas. I advise you not to enter the life-forbidden zone. Just as Luo Fan was about to step into the life-forbidden zone, the roars intertwined into these words and entered Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan was slightly taken aback. He knew that the being who spoke was the great consciousness of the area he was currently in. However, he was slightly taken aback because this great consciousness actually advised him not to enter the life-forbidden zone. After all, to this space-time, he was currently an extraterritorial demon. He was the enemy of this world. All living beings in this world should hate him. Why was this region's great consciousness advising him against it? Turning his head slightly, he saw a creature that looked like a vole at the foot of the mountain. It was looking at him silently. This was the being closest to him, as well as the clone of the great consciousness that was closest to him. Thank you for the reminder, fellow Taoist. I have my own score. Although it was strange, Luo Fan still said it. I've seen many living beings disappear from this world because they don't believe in the rules passed down since ancient times. I really can't bear it. Although you're an extraterritorial demon, you're not evil. That's why I'm advising you. It's up to you whether you want to listen or not. the vole-like being roared and intertwined with the roars coming from the distance to form these words. Luo Fan nodded with a smile. "Thank you." As he spoke, he cupped his hands and took a step forward. He crossed the boundary and entered the life forbidden zone. When the consciousness of this area saw Luo Fan stepping into it, it let out a sigh. How many has it been? 186,285,137? Or even more? What a pity. As it spoke, the region returned to its original state. The moment Luo Fan crossed the region, he felt the world around him become empty. The vitality in the air was 100 times more concentrated. Even the flesh and blood aura in the air was many times more concentrated than in the outside world. Normally, this place would definitely be the holy land for cultivation in this time-space. This is a great place. If the beings in this time-space could cultivate here, wouldn't their cultivation level skyrocket? Luo Fan took a deep breath. He could not help but praise when he felt the blood aura in his body become denser and his body become clearer. This forbidden zone was in the shape of a concave. It was tens of thousands of kilometers in circumference. This region was several times smaller than the region controlled by the Great Consciousness. The trees that grew in this forbidden zone were larger and more luxuriant than the outside world. Almost all of the ancient trees were indomitable and looked extremely awe-inspiring. Moreover, it wasn't completely empty between the trees. Instead, it was filled with life, and there were countless strange creatures living there. There were even more of them than in the outside world. It did not look like a forbidden zone for life at all. Instead, it was more like the holy land for cultivation that Luo Fan had imagined. There seems to be a strange aura here compared to the outside world. Luo Fan frowned and sensed carefully. He found a strange aura in the air that did not exist in the outside world. The aura could not be described with words. It seemed to exist, but it also seemed to not exist. It was scattered in the air. It was like flowing water, but also like a solid. It was confined within the forbidden zone and could not break through the top of the mountain at the edge of the forbidden zone. It was obvious that it was this aura that made the forbidden zone a forbidden zone. The great consciousnesses in the outside world did not dare to step into the forbidden zone. Luo Fan raised his hand and gently grabbed it. A strange aura that seemed to be solid was caught in his hand and placed in front of him. Luo Fan frowned as he looked at the aura. He carefully sensed the mysteriousness of the aura and found that there were countless strange patterns in the aura. The patterns were very mysterious. At the same time, Luo Fan found them very familiar. They were clearly the patterns that the Mountain Phoenix's stone tablet used to record information that he had seen before. They looked very messy, as if there was no connection between them. They could even be separated on their own, but when combined and intertwined, they formed an unbelievable result. They formed a strange effect that made the aura have the ability to repel all existences with such a structure. I see. No wonder this place is a forbidden zone for life. Seeing the mysteriousness of the aura, Luo Fan could not help but come to a sudden realization. He understood the truth behind why the forbidden zone was called a forbidden zone. The aura could repel all existences with the same structure as it. Those great consciousnesses were constructed by many living beings with such a structure. As such, once the great consciousnesses arrived, they would naturally be cut off. As a result, the strange beings that stepped into the forbidden zone would be completely cut off from their connection with other beings. As a result, the great consciousnesses would lose sight of the beings that stepped into the forbidden zone. It was equivalent to losing a part of the forbidden zone. As a result, it was very obvious that this was a forbidden zone that they could not approach. Understanding this, Luo Fan finally relaxed. He knew that there was indeed no danger in this forbidden zone. The aura could repel all existences with the same structure, which proved that it was more domineering than all other structures of the same kind. From this, it could be seen that the aura was closer to the source of the world than similar structures in other parts of the space-time. Luo Fan had indeed made the right decision to come to this place in search of the source of space-time. Luo Fan took a step forward. This time, he didn't use the method he had used before. Instead, he directly relied on his own martial arts attainments, and, with the help of the blood chi around his body, he displayed a kind of flying escape martial art. Then, he flew towards the direction where the aura in the forbidden area was the strongest. To the outside world, this forbidden zone seemed to be one entity, but it was not peaceful inside. There were countless battles and killings. Compared to the outside world, it was even more chaotic because it was not under the control of the consciousness. When Luo Fan's body passed through the ancient trees, it naturally attracted the attention of many creatures in the forbidden zone. For a moment, many creatures pounced towards Luo Fan and attacked him, wanting to turn him into their food. Although these creatures were quite powerful, at the very least, he had the vital energy and blood of an itinerant immortal. But his intelligence was low, and he could only rely on his instincts to fight, so he couldn't perfectly unleash the power of his vital energy and blood. To Luo Fan, such a creature was nothing. However, they were all trash that could be easily slapped to death with a single slap. Along the way, when facing the attacks of these creatures, he would casually slap them, and his palms would draw out mysterious trajectories, smashing those creatures into meat paste one after another, turning them into dust, while carrying with them an incomparably strong desire. Fortunately, these living beings were not fearless creatures. After more than a dozen were slapped to death by Luo Fan, the creatures that came later finally learned to be afraid. In the end, they avoided Luo Fan, allowing Luo Fan to easily traverse tens of thousands of kilometers and arrive at the place where the aura was the strongest. This was also the center of the Forbidden Zone. It was the bottom of the dried-up lake. It's actually this. Luo Fan's eyes lit up when he arrived and saw the center of the Forbidden Zone. What existed here was a huge tree. The tree wasn't very tall, but it was extremely huge. It was larger than any of the ancient trees in the Forbidden Zone. Its diameter was actually over 300 meters. Just this tree alone was like a rather large forest. It was extremely shocking. However, what made Luo Fan's eyes light up wasn't the size of the tree, but the nature of the tree. This tree actually possessed space-time characteristics. It didn't look like a tree, but like a space-time portal. Where does this portal lead to? Is it another dojo? Or is it the dojo of the senior who cultivated the spirit path? Luo Fan thought to himself. His senses surged as he tried his best to sense the mysteries of this tree and find a way to open this space-time portal. You are the first intelligent creature to appear before me in the past 78 trillion years. At that moment, an extremely old voice was heard in Luo Fan's ears. This was a language used by voice. It was a language that Luo Fan was very familiar with. It was the language used in the universe outside Earth. The language used by the consciousness was completely different from what Luo Fan had heard after coming to this space-time. Luo Fan was slightly shocked. However, he came to a realization soon after. This tree was so huge and mysterious, so it wasn't surprising that it had developed intelligence. Is that so? That's a great honor. I wonder if you can tell me where this place is and why your language is different from that of the living beings outside? Luo Fan asked. So you're a living being from the outside world. No wonder. The old voice was heard in Luo Fan's ears again. Then, in the void in front of Luo Fan, an indescribably old elder appeared out of thin air. This elder's body was extremely transparent, and it seemed illusory at the same time. It was obvious that this wasn't a normal physical body. The elder looked at Luo Fan with an indescribable expression. He seemed excited, but he also seemed numb. Since you can come here, why don't you know where this place is? As for the living beings in the outside world, they're just living beings that were naturally formed after being contaminated by the aura left behind by our master over the countless years. They don't have any inheritance at all, and the language they use is naturally developed from the roars of beasts. Of course, it's impossible for it to be the same as the language we inherited from our master, the elders said. So that's how it is. Luo Fan listened and somewhat understood what this place was. For a moment, he felt like sighing inexplicably. This place should be another dojo that was given by a saint. However, the owner of the dojo had died countless years ago, and his soul had dispersed. Thus, this dojo was left behind, and it had developed into the strange and prosperous civilization that was in front of him right now. Moreover, from the elder's words, Luo Fan could vaguely guess that the owner of this dojo had disappeared around 78 trillion years ago. I'm the transmission tree door of this dojo. There are 36,000 space-times in this dojo. I can send you to whichever space-time you want to go to. The elder's expression had returned to normal, and he looked at Luo Fan and said indifferently, "As expected, it's another dojo," Luo Fan thought to himself. He then asked, "I entered this dojo by mistake. May I know which saint's master is, and which senior is his disciple? Can you tell me?" "So you enter by mistake. That makes sense. Our master has disappeared for 78 trillion years, and all traces of him should have disappeared by now. Of course, you can't enter this dojo by following the normal way." The elder sighed. After a while, he said, "My master is a disciple of the supreme Grand Mist Ancestor. His title is Body God's Son. In that generation, he was the eldest senior brother of all the disciples of the sages. It is said that he has already set foot on the 9th step and is only one step away from becoming a saint." Body God's Son, the 9th step? Luo Fan was shocked when he heard that. He was not surprised that the owner of this dojo was a disciple of the supreme Grand Mist Ancestor. There were only 7 sages in the entire earth, so it was not strange for anyone to be a disciple of one of them. What shocked Luo Fan was that person's title, as well as his cultivation realm. Physique God was not an ordinary title. It required one to cultivate the body to an unbelievable level. It was even possible that one had to rely on the cultivation of the body to raise one's cultivation realm to the level of stepping on the 9 great steps. Only then could one barely bear such a title. Chapter 1073. I didn't know that Senior Divine Son was so powerful. It's my great fortune to be able to come to this dojo. Luo Fan sighed. Hearing Luo Fan sigh, the old man's gaze toward Luo Fan became slightly gentle. This dojo has 36,000 space-times. Why is this space-time adjacent to another dojo? I wonder if you can explain it to me. Luo Fan sighed and asked, "So, you traveled through time and space to come here from there. It seems that your opportunity is stronger than I thought." The old man looked at Luo Fan with a very strange look. "Why do you say that?" Luo Fan asked with a frown. "The dojo that you came from should be filled with soul chi. It's the complete opposite of this dojo, right?" The old man said. Luo Fan thought to himself and nodded. "That's right. The dojo you came from is the dojo of Master's good friend, Tian Hunzi. Back then, Master and Tian Hunzi didn't agree with each other because of their different daos. In the end, they decided to build various bridges between their dojos and let the 2 dojos compete with each other based on their own evolution. As far as I know, Tian Hunzi should have already set foot on the 8th step. He's only 1 step behind Master. It's definitely a great fortune for you to be able to enter Tian Hunzi's dojo before entering Master's dojo." The old man sighed. "So that senior is Senior Tian Hunzi. I only found out about it now." Luo Fan came to a realization. One of the masters of the 2 dojos cultivated the Tao of souls, while the other cultivated the Tao of flesh and blood. These 2 paths of cultivation did not completely repel each other. In fact, from another perspective, they could even be said to complement each other. However, the 2 dojos were so hostile toward each other. The first impression they gave was that they were completely opposite and couldn't tolerate each other. This was obviously a special arrangement by the masters of the dojos. In order to arrange these 2 dojos that were not completely opposite to each other and were completely hostile to each other, either the owners of the 2 dojos were hostile to each other, or they had a deep friendship with each other. They were hostile to each other. This was the layout of the dojo. It was only natural that such a result would result in such a result. Their deep friendship could also lead to such an outcome. Because of their deep friendship, it was not appropriate for them to attack directly. There were disputes between them. Naturally, they could only use the method of the dojo to determine who was stronger. It was understandable that Tianhun and Godson Ti had a deep relationship with each other. However, Divine Son Ti was a disciple of a sage 78 trillion years ago, so Tianhunzi must be from the same time period. I wonder which sage Tianhunzi is a disciple of? Luo Fan thought to himself and asked. The old man was a sentient being born from the teleportation tree door. He hadn't communicated with any intelligent beings for 78 trillion years. Although Luo Fan wanted to get to the bottom of it, he didn't feel annoyed. He answered all the questions and didn't show any signs of impatience. After hearing Luo Fan's question, he immediately said, Tianhunzi is a disciple of the supreme sage Taishang Dao ancestor. Back then, he was also the eldest senior brother under the supreme Dao ancestor. His status was similar to Master's. However, because he wasn't as powerful as Master, he was subservient to Master. He's also someone who has a high chance of becoming a sage. It's a pity that you're able to travel through time and space to come here. Tianhunzi must have died, right? That's right. I'm a fellow Taoist who obtained one of Senior Tianhunzi's magic treasures. I deduced the location of Senior Tianhunzi's dojo, so I had the opportunity to enter Senior Tianhunzi's dojo and come here. Luo Fan sighed. I see. Looks like there aren't any entry passes for these two dojos, but I happen to have the entry passes for the dojos of that era. Not only are there passes for Tianhunzi's and Master's dojos, but there are also passes for many dojos of the same era. As long as you agree to one of my conditions, I'll give it to you, the teleportation tree door said. There are other dojos? Luo Fan's eyes lit up. Although the Divine Son Ti and Tianhunzi's dojos didn't increase Luo Fan's cultivation realm by much, it was an eye-opener for him. He vaguely felt that his knowledge had increased a lot, and the barrier to improving his cultivation realm was much weaker than before. The benefits were so great that it was enough to make him feel satisfied. It was easy to imagine how beneficial it would be for him if he could witness the dojos of the other sages that had been destroyed over time. It was easy to imagine how tempting it was for him. What are your conditions, fellow Taoist? Luo Fan asked right away. My condition is very simple. You need to refine this dojo, then use your authority as the owner of this dojo to form a body for me. Place my divine sense in it, and let me leave the dojo. The old man's eyes were filled with intense desire as he spoke. Refine this dojo, Luo Fan repeated. He really had no desire for the dojo. Although the dojo was mysterious, it was not compatible with the Tao he cultivated. Besides, he already had the law realm, so the dojo was not very useful to him. More importantly, the dojo was given to his disciple by the sages. If he refined it, wouldn't he offend the sages? Even if he did not offend the sages, he would still form a strong bond with them. It was obviously not worth it to do that for the sake of benefits. Therefore, Luo Fan let out a sigh and shook his head after hearing the request. This dojo was given to Senior Divine Son by the sages. If I were to refine it, not only would I be disrespecting Senior Divine Son, but I would also be disrespecting the sages. I don't dare to do it for you. Fellow Taoist, please state your other conditions. The old man originally thought that the cultivator in front of him would readily agree to his request. After all, this dojo was created by a saint, and it had existed for trillions of years. He had already experienced many of its mysteries. How could anyone not agree to give away such a dojo? How could anyone resist such a temptation? To his surprise, as soon as the words left his mouth, the person in front of him didn't even have much interest on his face and directly said such words of rejection. This was really incomprehensible to him. The old man's expression froze for a while before he said in disbelief, Do you know how mysterious this dojo is? Do you know how much benefit you will gain after refining this dojo? Luo Fan nodded and said, Of course I do. This dojo belongs to Senior Divine Son of Ti, and it was established by the sages. It contains the cultivation path of the Divine Son of Ti. If I refine it, I will be able to obtain the countless cultivation experiences of Senior Divine Son of Ti and experience the techniques of the sages in the dojo. Even if I can't absorb it directly, it will still be useful for my cultivation. However, it can also be used as a reference for my cultivation. If I can obtain it, my cultivation speed will greatly increase in the future, and many of the bottlenecks that existed before will be greatly reduced. Since you know about it, why are you still rejecting it? The old man was even more incredulous. Doubt. These benefits were almost obvious. It was almost obvious. For a cultivator, was there any benefit that could compare to this? Didn't I already tell you the reason? This trip, I was disrespectful to Senior Divine Son of Tea and the sages. I don't dare to do it. Luo Fan sighed regretfully. The old man looked at Luo Fan as if he was looking at a monster at first, but it gradually turned into appreciation and admiration. Your rationality is 100 times stronger than I thought. Faced with such a temptation, you can actually think clearly about the pros and cons, the old man sighed. Of course, he knew that what Luo Fan said about being disrespectful to the Divine Son of Tea was just an excuse. The real reason he refused to accept this dojo was because of the following sentence: being disrespectful to the sages. The sages were supreme beings who could not be defeated by thousands of tribulations. Such beings could completely crush anyone below the sages, even those who had set foot on the 9th step, with a single thought. Being disrespectful to such an existence was like dancing under a mountain tied by a strand of hair. The level of danger was definitely beyond any risky action. After hearing the old man's evaluation, Luo Fan only smiled and said, "You don't have to talk about this anymore. Your goal is to get rid of the shackles and gain freedom. Perhaps there's another way to achieve your goal. You don't have to rely on the authority of the dojo's owner." Although he was unwilling to accept this dojo, he was very interested in the proof of entry that the old man had mentioned. He still wanted to find a way to obtain such a proof. After hearing Luo Fan's words, the old man's expression kept changing. His eyes flickered with countless thoughts. It was obvious that he was thinking hard. After a long time, he sighed and said, "I'm just a tree with limited knowledge. I can't think of any other way to gain freedom apart from this." Luo Fan could not help but frown slightly when he heard that. This was a bit troublesome. Normally speaking, all living beings should be the most concerned about their own matters, and they would definitely go through countless considerations and try countless methods to achieve their own freedom. The teleportation tree gate in front of him was even more so. It had existed for at least 7-8 trillion years. Under such circumstances, it naturally had to think more about this problem. Even so, it actually thought that it could only be achieved by obtaining the owner's authority and using that authority to change its nature. This was enough to show how difficult this matter was. Is there really no other way? There are countless ways to let a spiritual consciousness break away from the shackles of the body. Are none of them suitable for you? Luo Fan frowned. There's no other way. I've existed since the beginning of this dojo. It took me a few trillion years to give birth to my own spiritual consciousness. Everything about me has long fused with the entire dojo. My body is spread throughout the 36,000 spacetimes of the dojo. It can even be said that I'm the foundation of the 36,000 spacetimes. If anything happens to me, although the 36,000 spacetimes won't completely collapse, it will definitely become chaotic and cause great damage to the dojo. Therefore, if I want to break away from the shackles, I need to resist the power of the entire dojo. Only if I can become the owner of the dojo and use the owner's authority to operate will there be a chance for me to break away from the shackles. It's impossible to succeed using other methods. The old man said helplessly, "Extremely high degree of fusion with the dojo. My body is spread throughout and supporting the 36,000 spacetimes. This structure seems a little familiar." Luo Fan thought to himself. After a while, he suddenly came to a realization. This structure was clearly the structure of the greater consciousnesses in the spacetime. The bodies of the great consciousnesses were actually scattered among the strange creatures. In other words, his main body was actually the countless strange creatures that were scattered. Although this was different from the appearance of the old man's body, which was spread across the 36,000 spacetimes, there was no difference in essence. The old man was the foundation of the 36,000 spacetimes, and the greater consciousnesses were the foundation of the countless strange creatures. If the 36,000 spacetimes lost the old man, it would become chaotic. When the strange creatures lost the control of the greater consciousnesses, they would also fall into chaos. In many aspects, the old man was essentially the same as the greater consciousnesses. There was no difference in essence between the two. I see. If that's the case, then there's a way for the greater consciousnesses to break away from the shackles. Perhaps I can use it on this old man. With that thought in mind, Luo Fan said to the old man, "Fellow Taoist, don't worry for now. I might have a way for you to break away from the shackles. You can gain freedom." The old man's eyes lit up when he heard Luo Fan's words. His condensed body trembled slightly and seemed a little unstable. It was clear that this was a sign that his body had been greatly agitated and was unable to control itself. "What method do you have?" the old man asked anxiously. Luo Fan smiled and said, "It's a little hard to explain. Fellow Taoist, just watch and you'll know." With that, he raised his hand and pointed at the void. In an instant, countless blood chi surged, and the endless yuan chi in the surroundings interweaved into countless runes that condensed into a light screen in the void. The light and shadow on the light screen changed, revealing a world. This world was none other than the world outside the forbidden area. It was also the area that Luo Fan had been to before and belonged to the scope of this space-time. The scene displayed on the light screen changed unpredictably and directly displayed all the encounters that Luo Fan had encountered after coming to this space-time in detail. How Shan Xing attacked him, how he fought with him, how he opened up the tunnel of time and space, how he obtained so much merit, how he transcended the shackles of 10,000 spirits, what their true nature was, and so on and so forth. Everything was revealed on the screen of light. The old man's expression kept changing as he looked at the light screen. The light in his eyes grew brighter and brighter. In the end, when he saw Shan Xing break away from the shackles, his eyes were filled with shock. So their nature is actually the same as mine. So it's possible to use this method to achieve such a breakthrough. He murmured. The shock in his eyes was gradually mixed with a kind of regret and regret. If he hadn't looked down on the many living beings that were born because of his master's remnant aura and studied them earlier, he might have discovered that their nature was the same as his and obtained the method to break away from the shackles from them. He wouldn't have been restricted to his main body for trillions of years like this. After feeling emotional for a long time, the old man waited for the scenes on the light screen to completely calm down before he bowed toward Luo Fan and said, "As long as fellow Taoist helps me obtain merits, not only will I give you access to all of the dojos, but I will also give you all of Master's memories in my memories, as well as all of Master's comprehensions and experiences." Luo Fan's eyes lit up when he heard this. Originally, he only wanted to obtain access to many dojos so that he could find more abandoned dojos in the future and experience more wondrous space-time to increase his own knowledge. However, he didn't expect the teleportation tree gate to be able to obtain the various comprehensions that the Divine Sun had left in the depths of the dojos. This was extremely surprising to him. A dojo was something that was one with a cultivator's body and mind. It would grow along with the cultivator. All of the cultivator's comprehensions and cultivation experiences would naturally leave traces on the dojo and be imprinted in the depths of the dojo's origin. Because of this, obtaining someone else's dojo was equivalent to obtaining the various comprehensions and cultivation experiences of others after obtaining the dojo. Even if it wasn't completely complete, it was still a great opportunity. In order to obtain such comprehensions and experiences, generally speaking, the only way was to refine the dojo and become the owner of the dojo. However, he didn't expect the teleportation tree gate to have the ability to extract the comprehensions and experiences from the depths of the dojo's origin. This was truly a pleasant surprise. However, after thinking about it, it wasn't that strange. The teleportation tree gate was the foundation of the 36,000 space-time in the dojo, and its nature was very strange. Moreover, for the past 78 trillion years, no one had bothered to control him or restrict him, allowing him to do whatever he wanted to the dojo. In this way, it was not inconceivable that he could achieve such results and accomplish things that normal people would not be able to do. After understanding this, Luo Fan immediately nodded and said, "Deal." When the old man heard Luo Fan say these two words, he let out a long breath, and a joyful expression appeared on his face.